Good morning, second day of our GITEC. If a measure of a conference is how many people show up for the last morning, then I think we're doing pretty good this year. And I saw a lot of gimlet-eyed people at Pusser's last night, and we were standing on firmament. And so why were so many people like getting wobbly? Because nobody was on a boat. And then if you were at GITEC after dark last night, don't worry, we have photos. So welcome this morning. I'm Tom Temin, host of the Federal Drive on Federal News Network and Federal News Radio 15 AM, 1500 AM. Remember the old days, they used to say Radio 15. 00 was given. And welcome to the second day. GITEC, Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. They provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. We all know it is a great place to gather and exchange important ideas with high-end companies, high-end people in government, and it is really great to see everyone back here this morning. To get the day started, we have a visionary keynote, and the person that's going to introduce that is Mark Ryan. He's Federal Account Executive at Dynatrace. Mark, come on up. If you're still reading your notes, you're too late.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Tom. My name is Mark Ryan. As Tom said, I'm a account executive at Dynatrace. For those of you that don't know who Dynatrace is, we work very closely with many federal agencies, NASA, DoD, Intel community, and help to provide the insights that those folks need. We'll be talking more, it sounds like today, about digital transformation and really enabling all of those mission partners and stakeholders to get the information that's really critical to make those digital transformations successful. And as we've seen in the last couple of years, this drive toward more remote access, driving more success with the delivery of those applications. So this morning, I have the pleasure of introducing the morning keynote. This morning, we have the honor of listening to Ms. Laura Stanton. Laura is the Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Information Technology in GSA's Federal Acquisition Service, which provides buying platforms and acquisition services to federal, DoD, state, and local governments for a broad range of items, from office supplies and motor vehicles to information technology and telecom products and services. Laura manages the largest fee-for-service IT procurement and services operation in the U.S. government, providing access to relevant and timely IT and communication products, services, and solutions. Laura?
All right, good morning, and thank you so much for the introduction. Let me get this sort of at the right level. So I am very, very happy to be here, and just want to really start out by thanking Tom and the ATARC group for the invitation to give this morning's keynote. I have to say, I did take a look at the agenda yesterday and today, and it is a little bit daunting to be giving a visionary keynote address to the group that's gathered here today. But what I really wanted to focus on is really some trends that I've been seeing, both on the technology side, the acquisition side, and how those come together and what we're doing in GSA to help address some of those. But let me back up a little bit and say that, and give a little bit more background on my role at GSA. So I have a double role. The first is I'm the Assistant Commissioner for the IT category, as kindly introduced as. I'm also the OMB appointed government-wide category manager for IT. And so I have the opportunity to both see the government-wide spend of $70 billion last year in the IT, as well as having the opportunity to look and manage the operations to be able to deliver over $32 billion of those services last year. Across the various acquisition vehicles and programs that we run out of the General Services Administration. And what we're looking to do is to provide agencies with all maturity levels. you are the right support of technological and acquisition expertise. And the workforce that we have is well-versed in technology and acquisition. And so when I talk about the trends, this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but what it is that it's three of each that I wanted to really call out to this audience because I see them as important to where we're going. And starting with, and really, as I said, talk about the actions that we're doing. So the first is starting with the technology trends. Wanted to start out with 5G, move into cybersecurity, and ultimately go to what we're seeing as buying as a service. When it comes to 5G, we're looking at 5G to speed the delivery of services and enable new technologies. And we have been very active with the Federal Mobility Group over the past weeks, and actually over the last several years in taking a look at what's happening across the federal market. These new features and capabilities that are enabled by 5G are truly revolutionizing the business operations, and they're allowing for things like the smart warehouses and improved operation of autonomous vehicles for inventory management and machine learning for inventory tracking. And we're seeing those applications applied across the government today already in some of the test beds. The United States, the Department of Veterans Affairs is using 5G powered augmented reality for teaching and training and working towards pre-surgical planning to be able to improve their outcomes. We also are seeing the DoD using 5G smart warehouses to allow for that real-time asset tracking that I just spoke about, and automated robotics. And Alan Hill is right in front, and I know that he is also happy to talk at length about some of the things that he's had an opportunity to see as he's been on some of these 5G tours. But as these advanced capabilities are being added by the federal landscape, we also have a responsibility to ensure that our federal data, applications, and services continue to be secure. And we also need to make sure that as we transition from 5G to 6G or what coming next, that we have to ensure integration with existing infrastructure that we already have. So we have some key points that we need to be keeping our eyes on. And across the federal government, we really are trying to match that balance of the power of what is coming in the next generation and the imperative of making sure that all our communications are secure. It's that constant balancing act that we're taking on. And which brings me to the next trend that we're seeing, cybersecurity. And that is at the forefront of our conversations when it comes to IT. We are doing a lot in this space, and I'm going to come back to cyber not only when it comes to the technology trends, but also when it comes to the acquisition trends and how that's impacting what we're doing. Zero trust is so important that it emphasizes the continually properly implemented enterprise and mobile security. Even this morning, as I was standing, getting some coffee, I heard a couple of people talking about zero trust. So I knew I was in the right place. But GSA has been part of that zero trust conversation since the start. And this is where we as an organization in the IT category, we sit at that intersection of policy and operations. And we look at how we take those policies and operationalize them into a way that the agencies can then use and deliver and integrate into their mission delivery and technology. And that is critically important. And one of the key areas we've done this on is we've developed a Zero Trust Architecture Buyer's Guide. And that helps agencies understand the pillars of zero trust and also have a place to start their journey. We also have the continuous diagnostic and mitigation tools, highly adaptive cybersecurity solutions, the HACSIN, and the enterprise infrastructure contracts, which enable the building blocks of ZT in any government enterprise. So in addition to thinking about that intersection of policy, we also look at all of our contracts to make sure that we're capable of supporting those needs. Up until a couple of years ago, zero trust architecture was pretty unfamiliar to most of us in the government. And in August of 2020, we saw the release of NIST's special publication 800-207 titled Zero Trust Architecture. And agencies were given a standard deployment models and use cases at that point where zero trust could improve the enterprise's overall security posture. Prior to that, we were much more focused on the traditional perimeter defense and being able to route our data through various choke points. As we know, when we went home at the beginning of the pandemic, that no longer worked. And so we begun to look at how do we restructure not only the technology architectures, but also how do we restructure the acquisitions to be able to deliver on that. And so moving on, the third trend, I wanted to point out one other thing on the zero trust, which is there is no silver bullet. And no single product can achieve the zero trust alone as we're looking at this. Rather, when we talk to agencies about zero trust, and we're having a lot of those conversations, we're talking about the end state that they can achieve with the implementation of different security practices across the board. And we're asking them to rethink the very definition of trust and commit to creating a continuous system of access and authentication, which truly brings together multiple parts of what we're doing within ITC. The final technology I wanted to talk about today is buying as a service. And this one impacts not only, once again, the acquisition, but it also impacts the workforce and the delivery within the agencies. The government is transitioning to a greater reliance as a service type models. And this includes from enterprise IT infrastructure to buying less government owned hardware. We're seeing this in our own hardware buying data, that the buying numbers for hardware are going down at the same time that we're seeing increases in IT service data and obligations in that area. According to Gartner, and so then I began looking into it, and Gartner also said that by 2025, 95% of new IT investments made by government agencies will be made in as-a-service solutions. They pointed out a couple of reasons for this. The pandemic sped up the public sector adoption of the cloud solutions and the as-a-service models. It also provides scalability in a shorter time for delivering capability government as scale. It also has budget impacts as we begin to see the CapEx shifting for those big IT investments into different and being more into the pay-as-you-go OpEx type models. And this normalizes our IT spending over time and makes it easier on the budgeting front. But all of this is a transition when you begin thinking about the intersections of how do you acquire, how do you manage the budget, and how do you transition a workforce to be able to deliver on that. And also the as-a-service delivery models require those different IT skill sets and place less demand on the organization to develop or acquire emerging IT technology skills. And that, I know that there was a future of work, and certainly it's something that we've seen all trying to keep an IT workforce up to date and being able to deliver and track all of the new technologies that are coming at us. And this greater reliance on industry-provided infrastructure through the cloud and other as-a-service solutions consolidates and shrinks the footprint of the government data centers, also a key goal, and reduces the government's consumption of raw materials and energy. That takes us to one of the acquisition trends I wanted to speak about, which is sustainability. And this trend that we're seeing in the government has a number of benefits. According to an Accenture report, global data center electricity consumption is almost equal to the annual energy consumption of the country of Spain. So it's a huge issue. And this report shows that a broad public cloud migration could potentially reduce global CO2 emissions by 59 million tons a year, which is a 5.9% reduction, equivalent to taking 22 million cars off the road. So when we begin to talk about things such as transitioning to cloud, not only are we talking about the capabilities, the scalability, we also are beginning to integrate the importance of sustainability into that. So there are a tremendous number of benefits. And I called out these three trends in particular, not because they're the only technology trends, because I think anybody in this room could come up and point out that there are other technology trends underway, but I'm calling them out specifically because I think there are some of the ones we're seeing, and specifically in 5G, it feels like it's one of the ones that isn't spoken about as much, and we're beginning to see it emerge. I wanted to shift to how this then impacts the acquisition trends. So three also on this side: the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Want to touch more on sustainability and talk a little about what we're doing in that area. And then finally, the supply chain risk management, specifically cybersecurity in the terms of CSCRIM. First, DE&I. I promise I won't say diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility every time I reference it, because I know that I'm on a limited time frame for this keynote. But the DE&I are truly foundational. And when I talk about DE&I from my standpoint at GSA, yes, workforce is absolutely part of that conversation. But the piece that maybe is different coming from my perspective is thinking about our supplier base. And DE&I's supplier base is truly critical to making sure that we have a representative sample of suppliers that reflects what this country looks like. That is something that is key. And we put together an equity action plan across GSA. It is out on the gsa.gov site if you want to take a look at it. And we're looking really at better outcomes for every aspect of what GSA oversees. And we want to build a government that looks like, works with, and delivers for all of America. And part of making that happen is making sure that that supplier base is representative. We need everybody's ideas and products to make this country stronger. And we're working on reducing barriers and improving outcomes for small businesses. When I look at what we're doing within ITC, I'm looking at what barriers can we remove to get companies onto master contracts. And then once they get on those contracts, how do we ultimately make them successful? And we also are supporting the administration's goal of increasing the small disadvantaged business spend by over 50% in the next 5 years. You'll see this on some of the contracts that we've already put together. Somebody already referenced 8A Stars 3 to me, where we have over 1,000 8A companies on it. And we also have Polaris in the works, and that is going to be aimed at having highly skilled IT service providers from women-owned small businesses, service-disabled small businesses, and hub-zone small businesses. So really bringing together that constellation of all of the socioeconomic categories to give them a channel into the government and give the government agencies access to those highly qualified small businesses. There's more to come on that one on sam.gov, so feel free to continue to track that. And also, let me also reference that it is Happy Small Business Week. So hope everybody is taking their celebration on celebrating the small businesses of the country. Regarding sustainability, we've been working on this for some time. And we have the EIS contract where we've really worked in already into the contract terms and conditions. Through Defense Enterprise Office Solutions, we are working on cross-department collaboration with Department of Defense that enables them to reduce their physical footprint on on-premise infrastructure. And we also have our government strategic solutions for desktops and laptops that has EPEAT requirements already built into it for that equipment. And looking to the future, as I said, we're already playing a key role when it comes to sustainability, and we'll be continuing those conversations and looking at how we continue to both understand the opportunities that sustainability brings and the opportunity to integrate those into future acquisitions. We will be working with our suppliers to address climate change and risk in the delivery of critical products and services to the federal customer base. And we also want to help agencies buy greener products, which we are already doing in some of these areas. I do want to do a quick infomercial that we just announced on, I believe it was the 20th of April, April 22nd, that we have a government acquisition policy federal advisory committee that is launching on sustainability. So check out the Federal Register from April 22nd if you're interested in participating in that. That'll be an opportunity to directly offer feedback into GSA on acquisition policies and sustainability for those who are interested. And then finally, supply chain risk management. The federal government, this has certainly been a watchword over the last few years. And we are taking a number of proactive steps to reduce supply chain risk. And we've developed an acquisition community of practice in partnership with CISA to be able to help agencies understand how to incorporate supply chain risk management into best practices into their acquisitions to ensure security for what they're acquiring. And we're also working to optimize the acquisition process where SCRM is built in on the front end and not trying to apply it on the back end. And by doing this work up front, we're discouraging bad actors from the beginning. And it's important to also look at the C-SCRM throughout the acquisition cycle. And that means not only looking at that pre-award, but also looking at it post-award as we go forward. The Cyber Executive Order 1-year anniversary is coming up on May 12th. And the EO underlines the fundamental problem on how cybersecurity weaknesses leave critical infrastructure open to debilitating attacks. And so it has directed sweeping changes that we're seeing executed through the acquisitions that are coming to IT acquisitions. And even broader than IT, we've been sending the message that these are affecting all acquisitions. And this outlines what government agencies have to do to improve their collective defensive posture and reduce the risks that we're seeing coming from bad cyber actors. So we're also seeing those changes coming to the federal acquisition regulations, focusing on incident reporting and information sharing, and also standardizing cyber requirements for unclassified federal information systems. This is also where we're working very hard to help translate between industry and the federal government to be able to understand where industry is in awareness and preparation for some of these upcoming requirements, but then also helping agencies translate their requirements into their acquisitions. When I talk about the nexus that we play at GSA between policy and operations, I'm also talking about the nexus that we play between industry and government. So with that, I do want to, I believe I've actually gone a couple minutes over, so Tom has not given me the hook yet, but I do want to touch just on, in wrap up, that there's a lot packed into every one of these trends. And as I said, this is not a comprehensive list. These are just the ones that I wanted to touch on today. And all of the what we want to be able to weave together this expertise throughout GSA to be able to help the amount of information and translate the amount of data that's coming when it comes to acquisitions, when it comes to technology, and work both with the agencies to deliver on that and with industry to be able to help translate, as I mentioned earlier. And all of this is done in service of improving the mission to the American public and helping the agencies enact on their missions. So with that, I want to say thank you again for the opportunity to speak at this morning and pass it back to our moderator, Tom.
Thank you, Laura. That was a terrific summary of all of the trends, and I'm really glad that you were able to be here to weave it together for us this morning. A couple of things I forgot to do. One is acknowledge all the people online that are listening today. Unfortunately, you didn't have the sausage and bacon that we could stuff ourselves on, but we're glad you could be here for the really great content, starting off with Laura Stanton. Also, I wanted to once again acknowledge the vendors and the exhibitors that are here to make this all possible. They are Acquia, ASRC Federal, Blackwood, Okta, Zscaler, CrowdStrike, Contrast Security, Devo, I should say, Dynatrace, ExtraHop, Fortinet Federal, Gigamon, GitLab, NASA Soup is here, NIH NITAC program is also here, Pluralsight, Red Hat, RegScale, Rocket Chat, Rubric Federal, Science Logic, Software AG, Sonotype, Tenable, VM, Trend Micro. They missed the alphabetical order there. And Versec for partnering here with us at ATARC. And we thank them. And in the breaks, make sure you go visit. Don't just take the swag. Listen to what they have to say too. And get the swag. Lots of great pens today here. All right, we are on to our next panel. And for this, I'm going to welcome up our moderator is Kirsten Patton. She's the Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC. Kristen, where are you? Come on up. There's stairs on both ends of the podium. It's all yours.
All right, good morning. If our panelists would like to come up on stage, I will have each of you introduce yourselves. Okay, so our panel discussion today is going to be on the future of IT modernization within the federal government. And we have three recurring panel guests, but just in case we have some new folks in the room today, I'm going to have each of y'all please introduce yourselves. Let's start with you, Guy.
All right, good morning and welcome to my hometown of Annapolis. If I didn't have to be downtown at 11, I actually would have walked here. And so please have lunch, have dinner, help lower my taxes by spending money in Annapolis. And if you're very interested, Lemongrass, which is right across the street, is owned by the Annapolis mayor, just so that you know. But I'm Guy Cavallo. I am the OPM CIO. I've been the CIO for about 9 months there, and very happy to support this great group. One of the things that I'll be touching on modernization is that the cloud is not 3 years old, 5 years old, it's 18 years old. And I find it very sad that I've now implemented the cloud at 3 federal agencies as the first person to implement it when it's been around for 18 years. So IT modernization, let's get going. I mean, do we have to wait any longer for the cloud to prove itself? But with that, I'm sure we're going to have lots to talk about it.
Thank you. Over to you, Jerry.
My name is Gerald Karen. I am the CIO for the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the Inspector General. I have been there a year next week, actually. And then I am also the chair for ATARC's Zero Trust Working Group. I formerly did the TIC Working Group as well, and also am the co-chair for the CIO's Innovation Council on Zero Trust.
Thank you. And George?
George Duchek. I'm the Chief Information and Innovation Officer at the Defense Logistics Agency in Fort Belvoir. Before this, I was DASD in the Pentagon, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Command Control Communication Cyber and Business Systems, a real mouthful. And then was founding director DIUX out in Mountain View and director of AFRL Rome Labs in New York. And then private sector before that. And then the government before that. And then private sector before that. So I've been in and out. I just can't keep a job on either side. And Annapolis almost feels like a hometown since Naval Academy graduate. So I spent 4 years here.
Excellent. Thank you. So George, we're actually going to start the conversation off with you. I understand that DLA is going through an IT modernization journey here for the first time in quite some time. And I was hoping that maybe you could share with us a little bit about what that might look like.
Yeah, I can. How many folks have even heard of the Defense Logistics Agency? Oh, wow. Much more than I thought then. So I frankly hadn't heard much about before I went down there. But it is a kind of a unique business model because we do operate like a nonprofit organization. We're a working capital fund organization. So anytime we make an investment in, say, IT or infrastructure of any sort, it has to be really cost justified. It's not like you have an appropriated fund, you stick your hand out and Congress puts money in there. We actually have to find some buying power and economies of scale of buying large volumes of stuff to sell back to the services and then put a little bit of a load on that to make a profit. And then that profit really becomes our operating cost. So at the end of the year, we don't make a profit. So, but we're going through the first massive IT modernization in probably 25 years that DLA has. We've taken our 19 critical business systems and some 194 so applications and have pretty much moved everything to the cloud already. We've closed 21 of 23 data centers. We'll close our last 2 data centers this fiscal year. We also completed our migration of our ERP system to the cloud about 2 months ago or so, what's called enterprise buying system, EBS, and our warehouse system, data warehouse system as well. So big undertaking, a lot of moving parts. We've got a big effort with robotic process automation mixed in with all the other migrations. But fundamentally, there were 3 things I set to do with this modernization when I got to DLA. It's 1, improve the user experience. If you don't improve the user experience, and we have a lot of problems with latency and swivel chair systems where you'd be in one system, then you have to log off that one or even log on to another system and then fat finger information from one system into the next. And it's just very painful if you watch our users use some of these somewhat archaic 30-year-old systems. So improve the user experience is number 1, because that engenders trust with your customer base, your user base. 2, create a DLA platform. I know platforms are all the rage, and everybody says they're creating a platform, and that's what we're doing by taking all these disparate non-integrated systems, integrating them, and to give the user essentially capabilities that they need, and so they don't have to turn on or spin up a system to do their job. And then the 3rd one is to reorganize around data. Data is indeed a strategic asset. The DoD has said so. I believed it long before that. Our data is, I call it the 3 S's. It's scattered, it's siloed, and it's squirreled away. And we're trying to coalesce that into something that helps us go from an organization of, I think this is the right decision, to I know this is the right decision because we have the data to support it. So that's kind of modernization in a nutshell.
Thank you. And in our prep call, you mentioned the creation of some new roles when it comes to this journey that you're about to embark upon.
We did, and specifically in that data architecture, we created the role of a chief data architect, something that wasn't there before. Our enterprise architecture was somewhat lacking and nobody was paying attention to it, so we had to turn that up to 11 like Spinal Tap would do. And then we created a CDO, became a CDAO. Unlike the Department of Defense, our A stands for analytics, Chief Data and Analytics Officer, and we created a position of a Chief AI Officer. So we've really made a big investment in data because DLA literally sits on top of petabytes of data that hasn't been very useful to us in a large way yet. It's been useful in recording transactions and keeping book and keeping a retrospective look on how operations are going. But we want to get to that predictive look on where operations are going. I think we could do that.
Thank you. And Jerry and Guy, I'd like to open it up to you as well to share your own experiences at HHS and OPM for IT modernization.
All right, yeah, I think George just hit a critical point there. You don't go into an organization that's all legacy-based and siloed, and I think the 2 go together. The more legacy you are, the more siloed you're going to find that organization will be. You don't just put a CIO in there and say, okay, we're going to modernize today. You have to change everything. What I've done at OPM is I've rebuilt an executive team, just like George talked about. I've created positions that were never there before. We have a chief technology officer now, which we didn't have before. I have a site reliability engineer, and that's a critical role that when systems aren't working right, instead of pulling people out of production, now I'm going to have a specialist lead a team to go look at, is it just slowing down? Did we do something in the code? Is there something in the firewalls? Instead of trying to do every time, and any of you that are in the government, you know that happens all the time. There's going to be a system that's not quite down, but it's not working right. Instead of pulling a team together as a firefighter, I'm going to have a full-time team that focus on that, because you're really looking at improving the customer experience. I've created a digital services team I have quite a few developers on staff, but they're the developers that have been supporting the legacy systems. They're not familiar with agile development techniques, and that I want something delivered every 2 weeks, not every 2 months or 2 years. So I think if you don't rebuild the team, you're just coming in and window dressing. It's going to take time to get the right people on board. Because if you don't have the executive team on board with you, and that also means going out of the CIO's office and talking to your customers, your program offices, partnering with them. Because all of us that have been around, you're inheriting a legacy of what a CIO 10 CIOs ago did to that office, and they still remember, and they don't trust you. So you have to have the right team in place. You have to have a strategy and a vision. What I've brought to OPM is our strategic plan was years out of date. I know it takes time to develop one, so I issued a series of directives and a vision statement so that we would know why we're developing the next strategic plan. Here's where we're going. And what I'm hearing from the program offices is what they like most about what I've done at OPM is they have an idea of where we're headed. Everything needs to be modernized, everything. There's nothing that I inherited that doesn't need some type of customer experience lift or a total change in it. Those of you that are near retirement know that the retirement process is all paper-based. And so you have to, if you work with your HR offices, they're going to tell you start working a year before your retirement date to get things in order. Make sure you have a copy of all of your SF50s. Like George, I've been in and out of government. This is my 4th time back to the government. So I have SF50s, with like a 10-year break between them. You have to do all of that. That's not the way the government should work. So we're doing a number of things. One of the things I'm really happy that I put the team together to do it is we're doing that. The first time OPM's ever done an application rationalization. Those of you that follow it, the federal CIO has a plan for that. Gartner also has one, so we merged the two. And in my app rationalization, so we have a quad grid of systems that we just need to get rid of, systems that we have to tolerate and at least get them current on technology, systems that we want to rewrite, and systems we want to rewrite and move to the cloud. What my team has done is we've added a level of effort and cost element to that. So when I have the grid of the 4, I just don't have dots. I have circles of here's an application that's heavily used. It's not going to be much of a lift to modernize it, move it to the cloud, and it's not going to cost us a lot of money. That sticks out immediately instead of us just looking at it. So later on, I'm sure we're going to talk about technology modernization funding, and I plan to use that grid to help justify the money I'm asking for. I wake up every day super excited that there's something at OPM I have to fix this day. And the legacy I inherited, there's plenty of that to do, but you have to set the vision, have the right leadership team on board, focus on communicating and culture change to be successful.
In regards to modernization, we're done. Thank you. No, when you say 25 years, all of a sudden I just think of, people sitting at desks with Commodore 64s and TRS 80s or something, but that's quite a thing.
Which they had to bring in from home because
Yes.
the government didn't
Right.
supply them with the technology.
Right. So a lot of good talking points already taken. We talked about doing things in silos. Guy brought up another great point, something that, being new to my organization as well is having a strategy and, a very reactionary organization, which way, what's going on today, let's deal with that kind of thing. And, just not getting the, you deal with and you get mired in the operations of an organization and the ball's not moving forward. So wanted to move the ball forward. So definitely put a strategic plan together, mission, vision statement, as Guy also said, eliminate those stovepipes. And one of the other things that we did or trying to do better at is, it is mission driven, it is business driven. We want to make sure that we are accomplishing the mission. I remind my engineers and my staff all the time that, You know, HHS-OIG was not put on this earth to do IT. It's there to do other things. IT is the enabler of that mission. So therefore, we're drafting in, so to speak, the organization, the users as part of the IT team, so to speak. We try to tell them modernization is your opportunity. We're trying to modernize an application, for instance, and we talk to like 10 different people, and it's like, this is the way we do it. Well, no, you don't have to keep doing that way. I don't want to do the lift and shift aspect. This is an opportunity for you. How do you want to work? Not how do you work? How do you want to work? So that's the question that we're trying to ask is how do you want to work? Yes, it's good to understand the as is and understand their processes and their business processes and what needs to happen in that process, but really turn it around, make it, this is the enabler. Don't work for the tools will work for you, and really understand what those things that they need to do and how they want to work. We're doing it with Zero Trust as a matter of fact, because I talk about it all the time, is, really understanding not how do you work, but how do you want to work? What's the data that you need? What's the data? When do you need to access it? What data, what do you need to interoperate with? All of those things. And then those opportunities is like, now we map out new processes and we get the right tools that work for them, not them, backing into a tool. And, usually they're unhappy with that sort of thing. So we want to make sure that we make it as efficient and as easy for them as possible.
And Jerry, Guy just brought up the Technology Modernization Fund. So I also was wondering if maybe you could speak to that when it comes to funding IT modernization, allocating resources.
Yeah, so one of the things is, I've submitted for technology modernization funds, but it's a big list of people that have submitted. Guy's one of the lucky ones, and I need to get his trade secrets on that. But yeah, so we get, hopefully get technology modernization funds that would greatly help and accelerate some things. The way we get some funds is we get different types of funds. We don't get total central appropriations like some folks. I don't have a working capital fund like George speaks about, but we get these funds that we can do modernization with them. But the problem is now that I've deployed all these great things, let's say, got all these new things, I have to use I can't use that color of money. I have to use central funds, and sometimes that doesn't grow to the size that I need to do those new things. So there's that trade-off and that switch that we have to do. So we really have to do a lot of good planning ahead of time to figure out, if we introduce this new thing, I got to be able to, it's great to have it, but I got to be able to sustain it. So, how is that, and making those good justifications, business cases, impacts if we don't do things, how it supports the strategy, and our strategy, of course, supports the organization strategy, and we map all of that out. But it's difficult because we're in these, I think Guy and George might be a little different, but I know at least Guy would agree. We have these 2-year business, we have these 2-year budget cycles. So right now we're planning 24. And, I plan 24. Is that, what I'm planning now, is that really what I'm going to be doing? It's going to change within the next year. So it makes it a little difficult, but we have to be real strategic in how we do our budgeting.
Absolutely. Guy, were you about to comment?
Yeah, the Technology Modernization Fund. So yes, I was successful in getting one of my 6 proposals approved. Again, 1 out of 6. 2 of them are still on life support. 3 of them are dead. So the difference, going through this, and I asked for quite a bit of money because the nice thing about OPM is that there's been so many studies about how much modernization it needs that I didn't have to justify it. The number $150 million is out there and has been reported to the Hill that that's what it will take on top of OPM's regular budget to modernize everything. I didn't ask for $150 million. I've been around long enough to know that that wouldn't work. But what I did get successful with was our Zero Trust initiative. A big part of that was my CISO, James Saunders, is a key part on working on the working group that's developing the playbook for the federal government. So the secret here is you have to talk to them before and get feedback on your proposals before you actually go before the board. We went back and forth 2 or 3 times on Zero Trust so that by the time we presented to the board, we were in really good shape. My other proposals, we've gone back and forth, the two that are on life support several times. But what got us the one that won is we had a very concrete plan for our zero trust. I did put in one for IT modernization to just start working on that big mountain of things. And I listed systems, but I didn't justify them. So this application rationalization model that I just described to you previously, when I go back, now I'm going to be able to show the board, here's why I want this amount of money for this system and its impact across government. We all know there was $1 billion there. It didn't mean that they gave it out easily. So you couldn't just show up and present a proposal. You really had to do that homework. And I'm planning to go back, based on what we have, the two that we still have in the hopper, we're trying to get both of those through, but then I'm going to turn around and go back when we finish our application rationalization. I'm going to go back with a smaller chunk. That's the other thing. They want to see successes. If you ask for $100 million to fix 10 things, you're better off asking for $10 million to fix one thing and then go back to them after you've done that. But it's a great process. I found internally, it was a great learning experience for my staff to realize that we couldn't just argue for something for technical reasons. We had to tie it to the business justification, the impact on the citizens, and the impact on federal employees and retirees, because sooner or later, everyone comes back to OPM. So we had to tie everything to that. And we said it's helped my team understand that we can be technically correct, but still not get the money because you didn't justify it.
Okay, we'll open it up for audience questions here momentarily, so maybe we could get a mic prepared to pass around. But there was one other thing that we wanted to touch on, another concept, the new normal, the working from home hybrid approach, and how that would affect IT modernization. So would one of our panelists like to kick us off with that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'll go again. So when COVID first hit and we sent everybody home with their laptop, I'm sure a lot of us were expecting this will be a month or so, and it's like regular telework. You go home, you work on your tiny laptop screen and keyboard. You're not like you are in the office. At OPM, we give everybody 2 full-size monitors, full-size keyboard and mouse, a video camera. So let's just get everybody to work for the next month or 2 on this little device. Here we are years later, and I'm seeing a lot of agencies still are going that when you're at home, that's your environment. So working with our director last fall, I launched an initiative that we're going to equip everybody at home with the same equipment that they'd have in the office, because I want them to be productive. I don't want them trying to type an 80-page document on a little laptop screen. I love laptops and tablets when I'm traveling on a plane, but if I have to work on a huge document, you're forcing your end users to do that. So we came up with a process. We have 3 types of workers. We have office workers that are 100% in the office, so they get their regular setup. We have a new class of remote workers, of people that will never be in the office, so they don't get office space. But that means I don't need to provide them with the 2 monitors and docking station, everything in the office. I'm now going to provide that to them at their home. And then the hard group in the middle are the teleworkers, where most of the employees fall. We came up with a funnel of those that are working at home 8 days out of 10. They're going to get primarily, most of their equipment will be at home. Maybe they'll have 2 monitors at home and only 1 in the office if they're only in the office. And then we'll work our way down to the people who are only working at home 1 day a week or 1 day a pay period. They'll have more of their equipment at home. This is a massive logistics effort that I'm just getting ready to launch in the next week. So you look at, I'm looking at shipping up to 2 monitors, a docking station, keyboard and mouse, a video camera to every employee that's in that category. We've worked out a questionnaire and a way to work it out. I'm sure those of you that are in the federal government, some of the employees got fed up and went ahead and bought another monitor or keyboard and a mouse at home. I don't think that's the way we should make our workers work. I don't think they should have to buy technology to do their job. So, but we also didn't want to ship that person two monitors if they already have two that they brought at home. So we're doing a questionnaire. I'm working with HR so that we get that funnel of let's support the workers at home the most. And definitely I am a student of government. Our productivity is going to be closely watched. I believe we're going to see an increase with it by making it easier to work at home. The one thing I refuse to do, I will not buy a printer for anybody at home. I'm totally believe that we worked for 2 years without printing. So for them to start printing everything again, so the program offices have to pay for a printer, only of the ones that are on our approved list due to supply chain limitations. We want to make sure we know what's being connected. But most of our users have gotten used to not printing. So I'll let you know in a few months how that goes. It's probably going to take us 90 days or so to get all that equipment out. We've even had to work out a process where we have a drive-through at OPM headquarters where people can schedule time to come pick up their box and not even come in the building and head home and hook it up. So like I said, this is the way the world's going to work from now on. We're not going back to where we were. We've also implemented Teams for everybody and Teams phones for everybody. So when they take their laptop to the office, they have their phone with them. When they go home, they have their phone with them, which again makes it easier for them to be productive wherever they're working. And one quick plug, the Federal CIO Council has been working on a cross-government Teams initiative, which we're participating on. It is so cool for me to be able to Teams chat another CIO. And I did it in the middle of when he was in his executive meeting, which wasn't a great time to chat. But he told me he could talk later. And it's something that if I had my assistant call his assistant, it would have been like 3 weeks before we got to talk. So again, I'm seeing this collaboration across government now that, again, our job is to provide the tools, and you did a great job talking about that earlier. We want to make people as productive as possible. So for me to do that, I want them to have the right equipment wherever they're working. As long as they have a laptop and an internet connection, they have their office phone with them. So if they want to go sit at Starbucks and work, I'd rather have them get on my Zero Trust network before they do that, but they could. But that's what we're doing at OPM.
Thanks, Guy.
Yeah, I think the new normal was coming anyways, because look at the newer generation. Everybody walks with their heads down now. Why? Because they're looking at their phone. That's how people function. And to attract the newer generation, it's appealing in the federal government if you can have a mobile workforce. Have somebody from the federal government working out of Iowa, but attached to headquarters. That's much more attractive. And the good thing about it, it totally expands the hiring pool that we have. As a result, we don't have to just hire within the Beltway because we know across the Potomac Ocean, they're building that headquarters and they're going to be hiring more IT people. So that's just going to be more competition to bring people into the government. So with that, I think, so it accelerated it. So I don't think it's necessarily the new normal because of COVID. I think it was going that way anyways. However, us in the federal government, we're very methodical in how we go about things. Sometimes a cliche fits with the speed of government. But it's like, yeah, that person will never be able to have that position work mobily. Well, guess what? Administrators, like an Active Directory administrator, guess what? They're working from home. So, even those folks that are doing the IT support that, that will never happen. Well, it happened. So, what I think we really learned, and, right terminology or not, but I think we learned what our real true risk tolerances were by doing this acceleration to a mobile workforce, because like what we thought was like, either that's not possible or that's years down the road. No, we made it possible. And now we understand what our new risk tolerances are. Now we can build off those. And now the art of the possible is even greater as a result. And I think it's just been accelerated as a result of that. And I think, like I said, I think that's where we were going to go anyways, because the new generation does not want to sit in an office with a desktop. They just think it's a place to prop up their feet. And I know the old days, you push the button and the coffee tray came out. You know, they thought that would be a place to put their Mountain Dew because they don't drink
Uh-huh.
coffee anymore in the morning like me. So, you know, I think that's where we were going. So I just think we just accelerated things. And the epidemic was just the trigger to do that, really.
I don't think it's just the new generation that wants to work that way.
I do too.
So just a couple of follow-on points. I'll weave in some of the comments that you all brought, that both Jerry and Guy brought up. But at DLA before COVID, I was never in a meeting where everybody was in the same room. Some people were on the phone, some people were on video, and some people were in the room. And that was just normal. So when COVID hit, there wasn't really anything different. Maybe there were more people on the video. So that was not a big leap of faith, because we have a good chunk of our workforce really does telework or remote work, or is physically present. So, and it all seems to work. Looking at work as an outcome, not a place. Now, having said that, there is a lot to be said about social interaction, everybody coming together, seeing people in 3D, having those serendipitous conversations that you would when you're at the office. But I think that could be, woven into your whatever the future of work is going to be. So one of the things, though, going back now, rewinding to my earlier comments and trying to weave in some of these great points that Jerry and Guy made about IT modernization, we made the conscious decision at DLA not to call it IT modernization. And that was specifically because words matter. If it was IT modernization, the agency would have viewed it as, well, that's just an IT thing. That's just a CIO function. And I think you both made the point that nobody buys technology for the sake of technology. You buy it and employ it to solve some sort of business or mission problem. So we call it digital business transformation at DLA, to try to really get the functionals involved and to have a say-so, and to, in fact, really lead the transformation, because we're transforming the business. It's IT that's enabling that. So I think that was important, because what we're finding difficult, and the lessons learned, and I wish I'd known this before we started it, that there's always people, process, and technology, and pretty much in that order of importance. People change organizations, technology doesn't. It's got to be leadership led, and they also then have to re-envision the future to change those processes that they're using. And if our mind is shaped by the technologies we have, then if you're using a 30-year-old technology, you could only think of solving a problem the way you did 30 years ago. And trying to get folks to re-envision a different future when all they've seen are old tools is much more difficult than I thought. So if we could rewind and I could start this whole process at DLA over again, I would have placed much more emphasis on change management, changing mental models, changing just the way people think, because we really had to re-envision our business processes before we start employing the technology. So a big lesson learned there for me, being a tech geek, thinking everybody thinks like me. Well, wouldn't this be cool to try this out? No, if you have an organization that is rewarded for being very efficient, being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, they have processes that they have honed out over 20, 30 years that are very efficient. They know exactly what to do and how things flow. And now you're introducing something that perturbs that process. There's a strong autoimmune response, mostly from middle managers, because they're kind of caught in the middle from folks that want to do things differently, that have just come into the workforce, and leadership that says, well, we have to do things differently. So once you start perturbing that ecosystem, there's a strong autoimmune response, and you see them go through denial, anger, fear, depression, acceptance, all the stages of dying when you try to change a process. But that's part and parcel to any transformation, and it's calling it digital transformation is really business transformation.
Thank you. All right, with that, we are going to open it up to audience questions. So please submit questions of your own in the queue. Oh, wait, we're not on Zoom, so you guys can say them out loud here. But we do have folks at home. So if you want to submit your questions, we will get those answered for you too. All right, Ian Anderson, let's hear from you.
Yes, I'm Ian Anderson with Naval Surface Warfare Center of Dahlgren, also a working capital fund. Just wanted to kind of go on that, within the working capital fund, obviously, a project or, work comes to a team and they can pick it up. What were kind of the challenges with that, especially as you look to move to more, enterprise services with cloud and, working through that funding structure?
Yeah, the DLA, before I got there, I'm going to say around 2014, had a very fractured IT organization. Each one of we have 6 major subordinate commands managed. At that time, it was nine supply chains. We combined 2, so there's 8 supply chains now. But each organization had their own IT organization. About 6-8 years ago, they decided to make it an enterprise function. Well, from where I sit, I think that's been a great step in the right direction. We do get a lot of pushback from each of the MSCs saying that either IT costs too much or IT doesn't deliver what we want, or I say working in IT means never having to say you're welcome, because somebody always has, a problem with what you're doing. So, but I think the problem that they have is the transparency of how costs are allocated for the services that they're using. If they understood that better and viewed that as fair, I think they'd be okay with it. But the centralized IT is a step in the right direction for sure.
Any other questions? All right. Oh, okay, we'll go. Gray jacket, blue jacket.
Good morning. This question's for Guy. Guy, you talked a little bit about hiring SREs. We don't hear that much about that. So I'm curious how, as you go through this transformational journey, what is your DevOps, DevSecOps, SRE, and Zero Trust? Kind of how do you kind of envision those all kind of playing together as those applications kind of make that transformation into the cloud?
Oh, no, sure. Thank you for that. Yeah, we talked about people, process, technology. Again, as I'm bringing in these new resources, what I'm doing is combining the new thought leadership with the legacy thought leadership. So like if I take one of our legacy applications that right now I have staff that have been there for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I even have a 47-year employee just retired that have always worked on that application. I'm putting that person on the team, but I'm having my digital services lead that effort so that we can combine the talent and bridge that gap. What I've seen people do with digital services teams that I've seen fail is when you launch a team and you ignore the legacy staff and that team builds something new and then they go on to the next shiny object. In many cases, whatever they just built after a few years gets turned off. So you have to combine all of that. The SRE will be mainly working on day-to-day operations. So while we're building something, they're not going to be that involved, but they will be involved in looking at the architecture along with the enterprise architect that I also need to hire that we're interviewing for now. So yeah, I'm trying that. And I'm also adding a project manager to that triangle of leads so that that way I'm adding some adult supervision on the project management side to pulling the legacy staff along to today's world and keeping a lid on the digital services team from, let's put a retirement application that has 500 things you have to fill out on a mobile phone and people will love it. There's an in-between.
Good morning, Mike Curtis, RSA. What do you think is the biggest difference between doing business modernization for federal space to doing it as an enterprise level for commercial space? I know some of you have background in the commercial space. I'd be interested in hearing the difference.
Go ahead.
Not for profit. Yeah, I mean, we have to justify our money from, a larger pot of money, which trickles down and then you never get what you ask for. I think, for, not being in the private sector, I'll let these guys, probably can tell me I'm wrong or not. But, you know, I can take capital and I can put it more towards IT in the private sector, whereas here it's like, you know, we ask for the money and what trickles down is what we get and what we have to deal with. So you make the most of what you get. In that case, you know, it's not for profit. I don't have a cash flow. Working capital fund's a little different because there is a cash flow, but you have to turn it back into what that money's coming in for and modernizing that for what you're getting those working capital funds for. Because I've had a working capital fund before too. And to go back, and the other gentleman's question is that sometimes your customers, they say it's expensive. They don't understand the total cost of ownership. They see the surface, but they don't understand all the back end and that total cost of ownership. But I think simple answers, I'm a non-for-profit, for lack of a better term.
I'd also add that the color of money and the velocity of money, somewhat related when I say velocity. In the private sector, my dollars are much more fungible. If there an opportunity presented itself in the current year, I could move things around. In the government, not so much. I have to worry about, is it a new capability or is it an improvement to the existing capability? Is it a new capital investment or is, you know, you got to worry about if it's operational O&M dollars or acquisition dollars or R&D dollars. And those artificialities that Congress directs so they could track, you know, each one of those spends kind of puts left and right limits on what you can do as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add speed. In the private sector, we can make a decision. And if I need to talk to the CEO or the board, I can get the thing bought in a day. In the government, I was just talking to Laura, and it's not GSA's fault. I'm in month 18 of trying to compete a help desk. 18 months, and I'm told by August, if everything goes perfectly now, which will make it more like 20 months, I'll compete a help desk. And in the private sector, I would have done that in a month, I'd be done, and I would have no risk of protest, which again, unfortunately, there are a number of IT companies that realize that if they bid on something and lose it, if they protest it, they can possibly negotiate a buyback into the winner to slow, to speed the process up. In the private sector, you don't have protests. You make your decision and you go. Same thing with hiring. Since I came back to the federal government about 6 years ago, I've probably lost 15 people that I selected for a job across my 3 agencies that by the time we were ready to hire them, they took another job. In the private sector, they would have started in 2 weeks.
Do we have any other audience questions? Yes.
This one's for all 3. I was speaking to Guy earlier before we started. We're talking about software factories. I think I'm pretty well aware that you had to produce plans for zero trust planning in your budgets. I've always been a proponent of parallelism. I've seen a lot of emphasis on multi-factor, but again, we were talking about software factories. I would like to ask you, what was your approach to that? If you could answer. For anyone.
Software factory.
I'm not sure. I understand your
So in zero trust planning. Sorry, George, earlier. Zero trust planning, you have multiple pillars. There's been a lot of emphasis on multi-factor. We were talking about software factories and parlance of zero trust, say application testing. What was your approach in planning?
Well, for zero trust right now, we're doing the wait and watch what this is doing with Thunderdome right now, and see how that materializes. But with respect to our digital business transformation, we did stand up a software factory, and we got an approval to test, and now working on a full ATO for that to run one of these 194 systems. I said through it to make it cloud ready at the end of the factory. This 30-year-old system goes in, modern system comes out. And if you're familiar with DLA, you know that the hazardous material management system is going to be our first one that's going to go through the factory. It'd be our test case, or I guess our beta, to see how well that does. And then, build a little and learn a little and keep iterating on that.
So approach towards zero trust planning, basically what it did is Yeah, there's 5 pillars as DHS put in their maturity model, but we kind of broke it down in more pillars. And we have all the functional capabilities under each of those pillars, like data loss prevention, data segmentation, and a lot of these things. So without spending a penny, if I did not spend a penny, what could I do? Now, I may have non-security tools, but they still could be leveraged for something. So basically, we did that inventory, what solutions, what tools I could apply to one of those functional capabilities. And then I took the maturity model where it fit. How am I doing? And then, so things that I don't have, I can't do, I have gaps. Things I need to do better at, might color that yellow. Things I'm doing really well according to the maturity model may be green. Now I know where I stand. And then my next thing is out of that identified 5 priority projects that these are our foundational projects that we'll be able to build off. And then what we're doing is, for lack of a better term, road mapping, right? So we'd have objective 1 in the identity pillar, objective 1 in the network pillar. And we're not doing one pillar at a time because I don't like re-engineering, because all the pillars have to work together at the end of the day. So we identify those objectives. All right, what are all the projects and tasks to get to that first objective, where we want to be with the first objective in each of those? And we look at all the dependencies between the pillars as well. And so we're mapping that out right now and a little further. Plus, and people will ask, well, what are you doing about OMB 2209? Well, those are things that are being rolled into the overall plan, because 2209 isn't the end goal. There's a lot more to do than that. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking. I kind of think it's a logical approach, but I want to make the most of our investments, because we already talked about the last question about funding. If I don't get funding, I don't get the advantage of TMF funds. At least I know what I'm capable of possibly doing, so I can move the ball forward.
And I'll just add, we're doing all that planning too, but what I'm focusing on now is that currently we use VPN connection. Again, you already highlighted how much of my workforce is now remote. The VPN connection is a user choice, so they don't have to turn it on. They don't have to use it every day. And if they don't turn it on, I have no cyber visibility into what they're doing at all. So one of the first things we're going to do is replace our VPN with, and plus it's too many steps. So the user has to click on like 6 different things before they can even start working. What we implemented at SBA was we implemented zero trust, that as soon as you put your PIV card in and put your PIN in, it's automatic. You can't turn it off, and cyber sees it all the time. So I'm looking to do that same thing at OPM quickly, but all the other processes too, looking at our data, who can access what. But right now, I'm most excited about replacing the VPN and having 100% visibility into my remote workers that I do not have today.
Okay, I think we have time for about one more question. Ross?
Yeah, I'm interested. George, you mentioned a few times ERP systems. You mentioned hazardous material management systems. And Guy, you guys have a human capital management system. I'm wondering, as we modernize the government, taking advantage of service delivery, that people that build these services and can provide them to the cloud, I haven't seen a lot of enterprise business process management in the federal government. It's a lot of siloed services, right? How do you help bring that vision? Guy, you talked about the vision. You have to have the people understand where they need to go. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you can help the agency see what the possibility is through the service delivery.
Oh, sure. Yeah, just real quick. One of the things we do, and we now have a chief data officer, which the agency didn't have before. And with us using Office 365 G5 SKU, that meant that I have Power BI available for every user. And one thing that I saw is that we were providing either data dumps to external agencies where then they had to build dashboards or reports with it, or we were using 4 or 5 different BI tools to provide external dashboards, and then you had to have a license to use it. What we're doing now is making Power BI dashboards available to government users that we're just finalizing the steps for that now. So the hardest part at OPM is we also have a lot of very sensitive data, and so we can't share everything. But what I saw that what we're going to provide are easy to use dashboards that can replace hundreds of individual reports back to the agencies. So I think part of it is, again, doing that through the cloud. I did not want to do that on premise. So we're leveraging the Azure and Power BI clouds to do that. And that should be available later this summer. We still have a lot of silos within OPM that we're also working on our data strategy, but I think what you're going to see is we'll provide dashboards and data through the cloud to only the users who are allowed to use it, because obviously we don't want anybody to download who works where across government, but that's where we're headed.
So, 2/3 of our ERP cost is custom code. And so as we migrate from one system that's going end of life to the new one, we want to take advantage of as much out of the box as possible, recognizing that ERP providers expect some customization because that's kind of like the secret sauce of any business, right? So trying to get the right teams together, the ones that have the right mental models, where you're saying you take somebody that's been around for a while to somebody that's on the functional side to somebody that's on the IT. And we like to bring in somebody that's maybe never seen it before. So they have that beginner's mind and they could do the IDEO 5 whys. Every time you say you can't do it with the out of the box solution, keep asking why and keep peeling it back. And then we've also taken advantage of low code, no code platforms that allow us to do things outside of the ERP that would require some customization, but now you've developed that and you're not paying for it as part of the third party vendor that you've contracted with for that ERP. You do the low code, no code outside, and then put the results back into the system that way too. So we're really trying to de-customize most of our ERP solutions.
All right, well, thank you. Jerry, did you want to share anything else? Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Okay, so thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure moderating this panel today, and I will turn it back over to Tom.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, panelists. And by the way, when Guy said get dinner in Annapolis, if you go down, sort of go around this way out of here and you'll hit Main Street. If you go down Main Street, about halfway down Main Street, I stopped on the way back up from Pusser's last night to kind of counterbalance all the bourbon. They have this place that sells sandwiches named after famous Marylanders, and I forget the name of it. I said, well, I'm in Annapolis, I'll have a crab cake sandwich. She said, $25.99. I said, does that come with fries? She said, no, with $29.99, you can get 2 extras. I said, I'll stick with just the crab cake. And they gave me a clamshell box. I didn't want to eat there. I put it in my bag and I said, this is going to get cold. So I stopped on a wall at the courthouse, surrounded by a wall. There was benches in there, but it was padlocked, and sat down to open this crab cake. And I want to tell you, you couldn't hold this thing with 2 hands. It must have been like 5 ice cream scoops of lump crab meat. And somewhere in there, there was a bun and a bunch of salad. It was just a big like crab cake brown salad. So if you want a great narrow meal, go down the street to that place on the right with the skinny, narrow place, looks like a diner. And get Chicken Ruth. There we go, Chicken Ruth. All right, Chicken Ruth and crab, unbelievable. And by the way, Guy, I do have one piece of technical advice for you. I don't know where you went, but instead of 2 monitors, those big curved ones have gotten really cheap. And I don't know whether LG is on anybody's approved list because I don't know where they're made, but I just replaced 2 old monitors with 1 big curved one, and fantastic. So I would say maybe that'll minimize the box you need. All right, we have our next panel, which unfortunately you're going to have to listen to me moderate standing here the whole time. But let's welcome up our panelists. Ron Thompson has done about everything there is to do in government. Right now, he's the Chief Data Officer of NASA. Come on up, Ron. And we also have Kirsten Patton. She's the Chief Data Officer for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Come on up. And then we have Chris Bornman. He's the Software AG Government Solutions Chief Technology Officer. So come on up and let's give them a hand as they come up front here. And the title of this panel, sorry, Tom, is really boring. Importance of data governance and management. Why is it? Because everybody's in government, you feel like you have to have governance. I guess that makes sense, from a logical standpoint, but I think we're going to bring this around to a little bit more practical way of looking at data and looking at managing data. That sound good to you guys? Okay. And I want to start, usually I start panels with the two government people and have the industry person wind up, but I think, Chris, I'm going to start with you. And something struck me that George Duchak said in the last panel is that they have the triple S, at DLA, they have the triple S strategy for data, siloed, scattered, and squirreled away. And so just looking at government from externally and looking across government, is that how it is mostly triple S with respect to their government, to their governance of data, or is it a little more organized than that?
No, I do believe it's evolving into being a lot more organized in terms of the overall approaches to how we go through and do data. But I think everyone's kind of struggling with how do I go through and do that prioritization, for my different agencies, and then get everyone in the same boat as to how the flow of everything is going to go through and work.
So they're not so bad.
No, I think again, it's an evolving process right now.
All right, and Kirsten, I wanted to ask you, especially FERC, there's kind of a whole new regulatory approach that is taking place in FERC in the area of sustainability and supply chain and the cyber danger to the grid. And as you know, FERC regulates interstate commerce of electricity. They don't get to the local utilities, but it's a very subtle agency. But I've had several lawyers on my show talk about the new regulatory tack that FERC is taking. Has that manifested itself in the data that they're looking at and the data that you have to collect either from FERC's activities or from industry? And otherwise, tell us what's going on data-wise at FERC.
Sure. Yeah, so FERC is definitely an interesting place. I mean, I did spend 2.5 years at the Health and Human Services Inspector General Office, where we just heard Jerry, and I see Nicole there. I was at DHS as the Chief Data Architect.
Can we get her mic up a little bit here in the middle, please?
So FERC is definitely sort of a different mental framework to think about because we are a regulatory body. We are an independent regulatory agency. We are not part of the Department of Energy, which many people think we are, but we are fully separate. We do connect with them for sort of cyber conversations and budgetary type stuff, but we don't really connect with them otherwise. But FERC, for being a small agency, we have about 1,450 people, a budget of about 400 million. We have 13 program offices, which I think is a lot for such a small agency. And each of those program offices is to some degree fairly siloed, which is somewhat deliberate given the regulatory responsibilities that we have in terms of ensuring that we're separating sort of our administrative law judges and the work that they do from our trial lawyers. We can't have any type of coordination between those. And then when you think about the data space, I mean, there's a big data governance conversation, and we launched our data governance body August of 2019. And we're in an educational period. We're building our data literacy. We're building what that understanding of our data is, and that each of our program offices needs to be able to facilitate the responsibilities of their mission. But we do need to have a core foundational understanding of the data that we have available, what that data means, and a consistency in terms of how we're defining that data, how we're understanding that data. One thing that I found interesting at FERC, being a regulatory body, we get a lot of data in from our regulated entities. So if you think about information collections, the Paperwork Reduction Act, we are required to get OMB approval on any collection of data from the public per the Paperwork Reduction Act. FERC has 115 active information collections with our regulated entities and the public. If you compare that to DoD, I believe last I checked, they have 270. So if you think about size budget of DoD versus FERC, we have a lot of data coming into us. We have responsibilities to ensure that we're reducing the burden of those data collections. And that's a big data governance conversation, but that's also a shift of mindset. The Evidence Act is only about 2.5, 3 years old. So there's a lot of education now that's happening where we're sort of rethinking and re-strategizing how we're understanding those information collections. The information collection team just moved under me about 1.5 years ago, and that is actually a requirement of the M1923 phase 1 guidance for the Evidence Act that requires that CDOs are now the sort of clearance officers for an agency's information collections. And I strongly believe this is a data governance conversation, but it's also a change of mindset. So we're starting to have those processes to rethink the fact that we do have 115 data collections coming in across industry. These essentially represent data assets. Are we managing them well? Are we defining them well? Are we ensuring that we are truly doing our best to reduce the burden of those information collections? Do we have overlaps of data elements across those information collections? And through improved data models, through improved collection mechanisms, can we streamline that a bit more to ensure that we are not inadvertently duplicating data elements across those collections where we really shouldn't be? But previously, given legacy technology, we sometimes were forced to collect the same data element twice because we had no ability to even share that across technology platforms. So we're in a position now where FERC has also launched our application layer modernization initiative. So we're really rethinking a lot of that kind of stuff. We're integrating our modernization plans with data governance. I think my data governance meeting next week, we have a number of data elements on our agenda to discuss that have been specifically identified through our modernization plans. So we're starting to integrate this, but it's definitely a sort of data literacy and education process.
And you've been there how long?
2.5 years.
Okay, you're a fast learner. I mean, that was a lot of mastery. And just a quick follow-up question. You're the chief data officer at FERC. Do you also have data scientists? And what do you do? Especially how you relate to the CIO, if there is one there, and the CTO, if there is one there.
So there's no CTO. I do work for the CIO at FERC. And just given where FERC was in its maturity and the way it's structured, that makes sense for us. As I mentioned, we have 13 program offices. Every single one of those has kind of a data arm within them that are basically data scientists. Okay. So I have a staff of just 10. 4 of those people are fully dedicated to the Information Collections Paperwork Reduction Act processes because of how laborious that process is. So the other 6 of my staff are facilitating, managing our monthly data governance meetings, building out our analytics platform, our reporting modernization projects, and then training programs, because there are so many basically data scientists, economists, energy industry analysts, all of whom are effectively doing some type of data analytics or data science. So we've been rolling out a number of training programs, lunch and learns, frankly, to bring together that community, because I've found so many pockets of people basically trying their best to do data science and analytics. It would not be possible, I think, to even attempt to centralize those because there are so many across the program offices, and they have specialization for the data needs of their particular program offices. My job is to bring them together through governance and improve the collaboration so that we're building that consistency and awareness of the data across the commission.
Okay, thank you. Ron Thompson, who's done just about every function in government over 30 years that you can possibly name, now a longtime NASA guy. NASA does lots of things well. I always think of it as a public relations agency that launches rockets, but it also, come on, it also has just gigantic and vast data across so many domains, scientific, operational. So as the chief data officer, tell us what you do to rein those cats in and how the whole thing sets up.
So thanks, Tom. And you look back at the last 2.5 years and working in a pandemic, a different way of working. I think NASA was one of the few agencies that has really a lot to celebrate. We, working with our commercial partners, we really didn't skip a beat. We launched pretty much on schedule, really critical missions. You saw the Mars rover, in 21. Just recently we have the Webb telescope launching, and then, our commercial partners. I think I looked at the launch schedule when I was down at Kennedy, Tom, last month and a half, and I think next year they're projecting about a launch a week through Kennedy, and Kennedy is a commercial spaceport, obviously down in Florida. So, I hear Kirsten, sort of talking with other fellow CDOs across government. I think we're all pretty much in the same place. It's really humbling, and it's really also scary to say, hey, we're really at this foundational building block. And if you look at the federal data strategy, we're really into that wedge of a year, that foundational wedge of a year where really, Tom, pretty much, my time in this tenure in the last 3 years have been focused on putting the foundation in place, getting our governance structure, working with our business partners to take our pockets of excellence where we have data. Tom mentioned our scientific data. It's probably the largest data set that we have. If you look at what NASA does, we study the stars, we study the sun, the heliophysics, we study other planetary systems. So we have and we study the Earth as well, right? Vast data sets on climate change in the Earth. So a lot of that data, Tom, is really purpose-built. A lot of that data is absolutely rich and deep. But what we don't have, and what I've been working on over the last 3 years, is that holistic approach, looking at interoperability, working with other government agencies to say, hey, where can we share? I think there is the biggest opportunity. We talked a little bit about systems modernization in the last panel, and I was here yesterday, and I heard data mentioned in some form or fashion, probably at least 60 times during the conversations. And that's really, because if you think about it, systems exist for data, systems exist for information. And how do we securely protect that information, but also how do we really lessen the burden for how we collect, analyze, and disseminate that information as a whole. So Tom, it is a lot of wrangling, but it is humbling to see where we have pockets of excellence, grabbing those up and then sharing them within NASA and then sharing them externally as well. So it is a wonderful agency to work. If you ever have an opportunity to work at NASA, it is, you see the FEV score, it is the #1 large agency in government to work. So I like to tout that wherever I can. As we know, this is my last agency to work, so transitioning out. And Guy's left, and I really want to talk to him because he's going to see my application this summer. I want to make sure he can grease the skids for me. Yeah, so Tom, it's really the coordination, the connectiveness, the transparency of how we're using our information within NASA. We like to say data is our jet fuel that makes NASA run.
All right, and if you've seen some of the visualizations from the data from, the Webb telescope is essentially a data collection thing more than an optical camera. And some of the visualizations are really make you stop. They're almost spiritual in what it is they're able to convey. So congratulations on that, and just one of the great achievements. Well, let me go back to Chris. In looking at government and looking at industry and software AG, I mentioned yesterday, a lot of companies weren't around 30 years ago, but software AG was. What are some of the technical pieces that you find are necessary to get data organized, to be able to share it, interoperability across multiple organizations, whether industry or government? What's the missing sauce here?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are a couple of themes that we see. I've been on several CDO panels the last several years, just as the CDO roles were being defined and everyone was trying to figure out what that role really, even entailed. It's great to see staff starting to come into those groups versus just, a body of one a couple of years ago, right? So it's been evolving. But I think one of the challenges when you look at it from the data strategy, and I like at least that they gave a 10-year plan, not a go do this right now, plan, is that how do you go through and collect that? If you have a staff of even 10 within your agency, that still is a challenge. And how close are you to those systems to go through and do it? So what we're seeing is that a better approach is kind of like many hands do mixed bone work, right? And so we're seeing the policies being set at the CDO level, but then also groups starting to roll out from a tooling perspective, the common repository, and then putting the ownership back inside of each of the various groups. So if I can move out of email, out of spreadsheets, out of PowerPoint to go and collect that and instead go through and put it into a common meta model that at a policy you can dictate, but you can push it down into the various groups to actually execute and collect. It kind of changes the nature of how big of a problem do I have. And then we're seeing a focus more on data completeness. And so if you look at what data do I have, it's great to have a list, but how complete is my description against that data? What's the metadata of the data that I want to know that I have to have policies around, I have to go through and protect? And so we're seeing a shift towards, picking 5 to 10 attributes that a CDO wants to learn about across their agency and pushing that out. And then you can track that metrics as to how well have you collected that data from that various group, how complete is your information. And then once you've got that as your baseline, you could then tweak it to 15 or 20 elements that you want, right? So if you look at the elements you want to know, that was mentioned before with like OPM, sensitive data. So do I have PII data? Do I have PHI data? What's my FIPS categorization against my data? If I'm following my risk management framework associated, where is my data at? Not just is it in a cloud, but exactly like what state is my data located at? Which can be hard if you're also buying SaaS services, right? How granular can you get into where your data may be at? But there's a series of attributes to go through and collect and go through and manage it a little bit differently associated to that. I'm also seeing a big change from the CDOs that when we first started having conversations, it was, I get a lot of requests of, hey, we're looking to start sharing data across my agencies. Can I go do this? Right. And those are permission-based questions that were coming into them. And we're starting to see more of clarifying questions come in. And so no longer am I saying, can I start collaborating with this other agency? But instead, I'm going to the CDO and saying, I'm about to share this specific data. Here are the fields I want to share. Here's who I want to share it with. And do you have any issues with these fields? So it's much more of a clarification. All I want to do is very narrow scope versus going to the CDO with this broad request of, hey, can I start doing stuff with somebody else? It puts too much ownership on a 10-person or 2-person CDO group to try and unpack that. Your default answer is easier to go to no because it's just too big versus getting much more narrow in scope. And now I can go through and be more specific against that. So that's kind of the big trends I'm seeing against it and some of the tooling to enable that.
So Kirsten, what Chris just really described in some sense is not on the title of the panel. We've been talking about governance and management, but really I would call it data usability, because what good is it if it's simply a potential? And so maybe comment on what you're doing to make data usable to the real folks out there in FERC and maybe FERC partner agencies from time to time, so that it's not just a potential, nicely organized, nicely governed, but nobody knows it's there or how to get at it.
It's a very good question. I mean, I know data governance is so important, foundational to the work that we do, but also it's bureaucratic. It's not sexy. It's boring. People want to ignore it. They're looking for waivers to get out of it. So one of the best strategies I've used at multiple agencies now is pairing the implementation of data governance with the rollout of an analytics platform. This is what people want to have access to. So it's sort of the carrot stick strategy where we have to do data governance. We need to know that the data that we have is trusted, it's authoritative, it's safe, it's not going to create unnecessary risk for us. But yes, it is slightly bureaucratic, but I mean, that's because we have to talk, we have to collaborate. That is a people challenge. We've talked about the challenge of coordinating people, particularly in a hybrid space where collaboration and how you collaborate and talk to people in a hybrid space is very different than what we've been used to in an in-person environment. But having that analytics environment, building out into the cloud, getting the sort of scalable compute capacity that people are interested in, that's your carrot. That's the motivator to get people to come to the table. One thing we did at FERC, thinking about the last panel and things like 2-year appropriation cycles. I know when I got to FERC, I came in and they said, welcome, we're glad you're here. You have a staff of 1 and no budget, but we're glad you're here. And I have to go through a 2-year appropriation cycle to request budget. That is now. So what was I supposed to do, 2 years ago? So I did what I do and I went through the budget and I found pockets of legacy line items for various dashboard and reporting tools. I pulled them all together. I made my justifications with leadership to say, can I collapse these existing budget lines to start some projects? I think it came out to $286,000. But I was able to move into the cloud. One of the benefits of the cloud is I don't need to have a massive capital investment upfront to get started. So we got into the cloud, into our Azure environment with very nominal, just sort of representative structural schemas to be able to get a sense of what our data would look like so we could start building out our environment. And I think it took us about 6 months before we even surpassed a spend of $10,000. But we started, and then I found a number of legacy reporting environments, and we started modernizing them. And our legacy reporting environment, which was very PDF based, had about 530 legacy reports in them. Many of them were duplicated because in the PDF environment, even just a basic resort, refilter, change of column order is effectively a new report. And frankly, the data elements didn't necessarily match across the replication of the report because there hadn't been any consistency or data governance applied. So we were able to use this project to basically teach data governance, to say, you know, like for example, one of our offices alone had 90 of those 530 reports, and we were able to go through all 90 and say, fundamentally, these equate to about 11 data elements. You're reporting on 11 data elements, but you have 90 different versions of a report, all potentially showing different values of your accounts. And this is what data governance is. So that was the carrot to inspire people to realize data governance does matter. You do want to make sure that your accounts match, that you can trust what your reports say. We got into a cloud environment that got people very excited. So now here we are 2.5 years later, where we're actually getting more budget to bring in more resources and really ramp up our use of the cloud. So we were pretty strategic in kind of picking those legacy reporting environments, using more of our sort of operational data because those are our smaller data sets. But it did allow us to do a lot of learning in how we built out and automated our data pipelines. So now as we're getting more budget, more resources, we're able to pivot to more of our mission data sets, which are much higher in volume, that are going to cost us more money. But we now have that learning behind us. We've learned a lot about how to build our change data capture and enterprise data sync strategies so we can start really moving forward now on the mission side. But, you know, we got a lot of that started, like I said, $286,000.
So the nugget I'm taking away from what you say is that data governance then is not just about the risk of the data and the risk management of the data, but also about the utility of it.
Oh, absolutely. It's the business use. You know, I want to make sure that if I have, I don't know, a semi-annual report that's going to Congress and I'm counting how many items we've processed, how many investigations or how many audits, I want to know that I'm doing it the same way every time, that we aren't using a different set of logic because Bill counted the numbers last time and now Jane's counting the numbers this time. It should be automated. It should be a one click.
Of course, in dealing with Congress, there is no such thing as logic. And isn't that the irony? It takes 2.5 years to get to an appropriation, then you've got 4 months to spend it. But nothing we can do about that in this room.
Well, true. We are still living under, we're still kind of trying to get out of the CR right now. And how many months do we have now?
Until the treasury accounts get, you know, the money flows in. And Ron, that whole question of utility in the governance and then making it practical.
Yeah, Kirsten hit on a few things. It's sort of, I think all CDOs sort of have to deal with this is you really start with the visualization layer, right? You really want to make sure that folks can see. You don't want to just talk about it, right? And how governance works, but can they see the data? And those that were here yesterday with Kevin Duvall at HHS, I sort of called him out a little bit because he did really help us across government during the early pandemic times on liberating the data for, for COVID cases. So that's a really good, I think, use case of where the CDO role can really empower and protect our information. But so the veracity of data, right? The quality of data is really, really important. You know, Kirsten mentioned, hey, we don't want to put something out that isn't consistent. It doesn't have some type of longitudinal way to prove or see what the changes were. So that is really utmost important for us, make sure, because we have to be precise. Safety is in our culture in Nash, so we have to be very safe in what we do. But we really have 4 shared priorities, part of our data strategy, and that's around data stewardships. So this is really looking at the data owners throughout the organization that own the information. So this is part of our data plan, and we have also invested in our enterprise data platform. And basically that's a conduit for identifying and gaining access to all our strategic assets, and one way in, one way out, so we can make sure that things are consistent. And then we have a data community. So Tom, you mentioned, sort of the data scientist community, the data visualization. We have, like NASA, like many other organizations, very federated in how we do things. So that data community is very active. My office provides guidance for interoperability and not constraints on how they work, but we want to make sure things are done consistently in a way. And then the last tenet is our data literacy, and that's working with our HR. And it's part of the Evidence Act to make sure that the priority questions are asked for the agency, but it is starting with transparency, right? I think in a panel or 2 before, we talked about the Gen Zs coming in. If you look at where the opportunity lies, Tom, it's senior leadership wants transparency. Our Gen Zs want transparency. I think the opportunity from a cultural aspect is that middle layer believes that they need to explain information versus liberating it or putting it available, and they think that's what their value is. So we the culture is for us. It is top of mind for making sure that this is successful. And then we actually took the role of CDO and coupled it with our digital transformation effort. And John Sprague is in the back. John was part of that very early work. Thank you, John. And we laid down a plan and worked with our mission directorates to make sure that we saw opportunities to improve. And data was at the core base of that digital transformation. So it is a partnership. Many of you may have heard me talk about this in other panels and digital transformation, but we see all these things linking together. Digital transformation, data literacy, data stewardship, all these things link together, and they are part of that ecosystem to make decision-making open, transparent, and actionable for our agency.
It almost sounds like building of data libraries. The problem with Generation Z is they never had to look up a book using the Dewey Decimal System. Don't I sound like an aging boomer saying that? All right, we have a few minutes left. We've got about 13 minutes left. Let's open it up to the floor. We got the mic going around. Rare chance to question 3 really great experts. And by the way, tell us who you are and where you're from.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. I'm Ross Ford. I'm from CISA. Managing access to sensitive data is one of my main interests, right? Are any of the CDO officers working with NARA as they redefine CUI, the controlled unclassified information, and then I think they were going to also include some data information sharing rules or some guidance on that. Are you working with them? Is there something going on there?
I will say FERC actually has, I think, one of the most mature CUI programs that I've seen across my time in government. So when I arrived at FERC, there was already a very strong CUI program under our CISO's office. And they built out our whole sort of CUI structure in partnership with NARA, and that's all been approved through the NARA process. We've enabled the, what's it called, the Azure protection grid in all of our Microsoft, in our Office 365. It works very seamlessly. Our workforce is very used to tagging all of their documents. The one thing now coming in as a CDO, while we've done a phenomenal job on our document side, the same had not really applied in our data. So we're now starting to apply that into our data inventories to say, we already have a really fantastic CUI structure and labels. We now need to apply those same sensitivity labels to our data assets and our data sets as part of our data as part of our comprehensive data inventory, so that within our analytics platform, we're tagging our data there, which then we should be able to drive based on who a person is, what the rules are for what they're allowed to have access, how the data has been tagged. That should be able to drive who has access to what data at any given time. It shouldn't have to go through sort of our permissions process or you got into a group and maybe you shouldn't be in that group anymore because your role has changed, but no one remembered to remove you. So we already have, I would say, a very strong CUI program. Now we're starting to apply that to our actual structured data assets. But I will say our CISO team and our CUI program team has done a phenomenal job even just creating that, that tagging structure. And I'm pretty impressed with the FERC workforce that they are tagging their emails and their documents with the right CUI labels.
So,
Sister says it's encouraging. That's good.
So Ross, I'm wondering, and we're doing a lot of the foundational things that that Kirsten mentioned as well. I'm wondering if there's a play with zero trust and role-based access versus the individual. So, I've been talking with our security folks about that. We're going to role-based access information when you need it, where and shut that access back down. So should we be doing this less from an archive individual or by role? So I'm kind of thinking there may be a play there too. So maybe we can talk.
I think two sides of the coin,
Yeah.
right? The resource identification, the role identification, that's how you make your appropriate risk.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about, that sort of attribute-based access control model
yes.
of, if we've tagged our data appropriately, we know who our people are and their attributes. We should know that rules engine in between. We should be able to drive access to data without having to know who an individual person is, but rather what their attributes should drive that access to data.
But great question, Ross. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to expand off of that from the data level. I'm glad you brought the data level versus the document level. We're fairly mature along the line on the documents. It's always been the traditional side. But look at the data level and that middle layer that you mentioned, you get into our APIs and how we actually control the access to it. So that your APIs and based off your authentication, from the consumer, the application doing it, and the user who's making that request and the roles associated to that, can also then drive how do you go through and look at, do you need to do some masking off that data, certain data that they don't have, whether it's the COI data, whether it's PAI data or it's PHI data, et cetera, can be handled at the API layer. So I think you got to look at the three, not just the endpoint of the repository and the requester, but that middle layer becomes very, very important, how you expose it out to your integrations, to your analytics, or to your exports of data. I think there's a shift from doing the big data dump at the end of the year of here's everything that happened last year, right, to a timeliness where we saw with COVID, where who cared how many hospital beds were in the United States until the pandemic really hit, and then not just how many have, but how many are occupied and how is it changing on a daily basis. Totally changed the nature of that. So you got to move from looking at your security at the release of like an annual report to like near real time. And that middle layer ends up becoming very, very important too.
Yeah. Hey, Matthew Shepard, HHS.
Matt.
Hi, Ron. Good to see you. I just wanted to follow up on that. You're all talking sort of an end state where a lot of people want to be. And on 2209, the requirements a very low bar just to sort of establish things. Are there any steps or anything that you've done along the way that was critical or sort of helped you leapfrog to the place where you've got data tagged and are now thinking about not just documents, but my other data sets, how I tag those?
I mean, I could argue that the Evidence Act is already requiring that all agencies establish a comprehensive data inventory, and that's been around for 3 years now. And so the requirements of the zero trust strategy kind of actually surprised me in terms of tagging our data, because that was already a requirement as part of the comprehensive data inventory, really. I mean, your data sensitivity is just one additional metadata element to your comprehensive data inventory. And if you're already inventorying your data, that shouldn't be a huge lift. I do recognize not all agencies are that mature, but I will say us CDOs think about that a lot and have been thinking about that for years. So that was already part of our strategy. Now, of course, we have to play that into how we request resources and budget and the organizational and cultural changes. So there's all those pieces at play. But I think strategically, we've all been thinking about this for a long time.
Yeah, I would think more tactically than that. I was thinking more as a user or a consumer or somebody who is actually transitioning data from a data set through email to doing their normal work. There's a level of awareness that having that ability to tag the data when you create it or when you share it, that helps educate the user and helps sort of drive that into the culture. And I think that's the challenge between the CDO and the IT community, to sort of figure that out. I was wondering, that was sort of where I was focusing my question, I guess.
I mean, I might defer to Ron in terms of the data literacy and data stewardship strategies, because that is kind of why we're thinking about these things, right, Ron?
Yeah, so Matthew, good to see you, by the way. Matthew and I worked together at HHS many moons ago. I think, honestly, we have pockets where this is working well. We have programs where this is not top of mind, but a priority, right? Focus. But holistically across the organization, I think we have a ways to go. But also, I think there's a big opportunity for the government to do this between agencies as well. Because if you look at the burden of what we put our citizens through, right? We ask the same information, whether it's IRS or, I'm not picking on anybody here, so don't take this. But just as a citizen, you know, how many forms do I need to fill out from the IRS, CMS, the same information, right? So how do we lessen the burden and you know, for data collection, and how do we work together? I mean, we have our NEEM standards, so we have a little bit of history there with doing that. But how do we? I mean, the question is, how do we do this across federal agencies? How do we do this better within our agencies? How do we form a taxonomy that defines, you know, an attribute and how that attribute's used? So Matthew, I think it is, it's like how do you eat an elephant, right? You know, you work in where you have the support within the organization and you build upon that. I think that's really the answer. But I think interoperability across government is really, really a great opportunity. So this is important to us, but as Kirsten mentioned, these are influencer roles. We don't have a lot of direct resources to invest and make people do it. Even though the Evidence Act is very powerful, it's still optional in some regards. So we use those tools and levers as we see fit and celebrate the support within our organization. So I guess that's.
Yeah, I mean, even to the question, one of the questions in the earlier panel, I'm talking about the difference between private sector and government. One big difference I see very much in the government space is we are far more influencers and relationship builders and coalition builders in terms of how we move things forward than when I was in the private sector, where there's very much of a top down. This is what we're going to do and how we will march forward, and everyone does. That is not how the government works. There are so many different lines of authority and lines of appropriation and different sort of control mechanisms on different pockets of budget, that just because there is some executive order or law doesn't necessarily enforce it without the right influence and relationships built. And so that's such core to what we do, is building those relationships so that people trust us, so that they will want to move forward and understand why this matters to their day-to-day work.
All right, we have time for one more lightning round question. Please make your question brief and we'll ask the panelists to make the answers real quick.
Hi, good morning. My name is Siobhan Odom and I'm from Medallia.
Speak up.
Hi, my name is Siobhan Odom and I'm from Medallia. I was wondering, just based on some of the mentions that you've made around trust, transparency, and even maybe your 13 program offices as customers at FERC, I'm curious around whether the CX executive order has helped shape how you're looking at your data strategy now. Has it had any impact or how are you looking at that with regard to being able to build or rebuild trust?
Okay, 30 seconds.
We've definitely started looking at that. I mean, it's still a new enough executive order that we're still sort of contemplating exactly how to consider it. But I do think customer experience is going to be key to how we, like, for example, FERC's 115 information collections. What is the customer experience we're creating with our public when we're asking for all of those different data collections? And I know FERC actually just created an Office of Public Participation specifically to consider how we engage with the public. So my team is actually working pretty closely with the Office of Public Participation. Specifically, we brought up the customer experience executive order, and we're starting to strategize, but we're starting.
Okay, any final comments? If not, we will thank the panel. Let's thank Ron Thompson, Kirsten Patton, Chris Bornman. Great insight. Okay, before you leave seats, a quick note, we left Micro Focus as one of the sponsors off of the list. It was not on the script, but they're here and we want to thank them too. We'll get to all the vendors later on. We're going to take about a 15-minute break. That should give you enough time to get your baggage and take the long walk down the long, dark, mysterious alley to where your car is actually parked if you were too cheap to do valet. And we'll be back here at about 11 o'clock for our, I'm sorry, we'll be back here about 11:15, 11:20. We have one more great panel. Nobody leave. Okay, thank you all for being here. We have one more great panel. And after that panel, we have a really important award for someone who's really terrific in government. So we have a couple more items to go. And if she is in the room, I would like to bring up the moderator for our final panel as soon as I can find it in my script. Okay, and that would be Amy Kluber is moderating. She's the editor-in-chief at GovCIO Media and Research. Amy, it's all yours.
All right, hello everybody in person. I'm going to ask my panelists to come on up. We have CIO at the USPTO, Jamie Holcomb, and also Gerald Karen, or Jerry, CIO at the HHS-OIG.
You want us to?
All right,
This way?
take a seat.
All right.
So welcome to the last panel. Hopefully save the best for last.
So we're standing between.
Oh, I'm
these
on the
guys
wrong
and-
panel then.
Yeah, so these guys at lunch? Oh, no. Darn it.
Well, as we know, the Biden administration has released several directives. We have the PMA and several executive orders, and who better to talk about how some of these are impacting agencies as the CIOs themselves. So welcome both. Jamie, I'm going to toss it over to you first. One thing Jamie will tell us a little bit later is why totally being anonymous in the patent process is a good thing, and how zero trust might fit into that. So Jamie, give us a rundown of your role and the agency.
Oh, sure. So being the CIO at the USPTO has really been a great duty and mission. It's amazing what we do. So of course, it's to award patents and register trademarks. But when I came over there, the whole thing about the culture, you know, we sub-optimized in so many ways, and the government does that. It has a tendency to sub-optimize the support services. So I have the best finance. I have the best procurement. I have the best HR. Who cares? How about accomplishing the mission? So what is your mission all about? So my network engineer can now tell me how he contributes to the awarding of patents or the registering of trademarks. Because if you can't connect your job to the actual mission, there's a problem. And there's a problem in leadership too. So often leaders think about sub-optimizing their own contribution. I got to show it. I got to move up the ladder. I got to do all this. And yet it's not about that. It's getting the mission done. So mission first, but people always. And so when we talk about some of these things coming in, the president's executive orders, as an example, are more of a strategic play at what should happen across the government. We as leaders then are given that solemn duty then to get the tactical execution and the metrics involved, because you can't imagine having to give an executive order and it apply across to everything, especially as a diverse land as America. Oh my gosh, that's why the founding fathers came up with a federated system, so that things wouldn't be from an authoritative autocratic government. And we need to move back to that type of federation rather than bureaucracy, as stated in the CDO just before us, right? Data, every time data is trying to centralize, it always fails. And why? Because the brittleness of that attempt. If you try to control things so tight, things get so rigid that they break and crack and it doesn't apply. That's why federation is such a better way to go about things. It's more resilient. The local folks in their different regions can decide better what they can do themselves if you give them good general guidelines. And so that's what I wanted to talk about, in this panel. And I didn't want to take up the whole time, so.
Oh, please. So Jerry, I know you were in a panel earlier, so I'm sure everyone's well familiar with who you are. But give us a rundown of a little bit about your role and how you're thinking about executive orders overall.
I don't know, but everything he said, I just want to say hallelujah. Because points are very spot on, totally agree. So yeah, I'm the CIO for the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the Inspector General. Very much, right in line with many of the things he said. So don't want to totally regurgitate it, but yeah, definitely. I asked my engineers, why are you doing that thing? Well, it's the latest, greatest thing from so-and-so. It's like, well, no, that's not the answer that you want. You want an answer. It's like, how is it bettering the mission? That's what we're put on earth to do, is do the mission of the agency, not to do IT necessarily. So definitely, definitely reflect all of that as well. But, fraud, waste, and abuse, Medicaid and Medicaid fraud, things like that. It is, as Jamie talked about, data driven, right? That's what we do is, we rely on data each and every day. And from the user standpoint, it's the right data to the right people at the right time. And they want to make sure that that data has its integrity. That's why I'm a big advocate for zero trust, because when you talk about zero trust, which is a big part of the executive order on strengthening the nation's cybersecurity, and it says strengthening, doesn't say complying, which I think the federal government does a lot of, but we're trying to strengthen cybersecurity. Big difference between the two. But that to me is the heart of it, is getting about protecting data and making sure that it's the right data, the right people at the right time, and they can rely on it. In doing so, definitely have to understand, that when we talk about the right data, the right people, the right time, people have argued with me about, I really think it's about identity. Well, no, it's got to be driven by what are they trying to access? That's the data. If you get compromised, what's the cybersecurity analyst going to ask? What did they have access to? Is there exfil? All right, that's about data. So it's very important. But all 5 pillars of the zero trust is important. I think from the part of the executive orders also about customer service, patents, yes, he has a customer, people applying for patents. I have, people are getting medical services. They want to make sure they're reliable, their money's going to the right place. Nursing homes is very important aspect in which the IG is looking into now. And, make sure that there's quality care at these nursing homes and things. It's all about the taxpayers' money at the end of the day. So all of the US citizens are our customers at the end of the day when you look at it in the big scheme of things. So we have to do right by those taxpayers and make sure that we deliver the quality services to our more direct customers, which is, for me, the IG components in which we serve, that they're able to go out to the mission, which in turn, does right by the taxpayers. So
I want to pull on that thread a little bit about the taxpayer, because Jamie has a couple thoughts, being an independent agency.
Yep.
How does that play into some of how you think about the executive orders and how you strategize around IT priorities?
So again, I think executive orders are more guidelines and strategy than they are tactics.
Right.
And so it's up to the leaders to ensure that you're fulfilling the intent rather than the letter. And so an example of zero trust and so forth, yeah, there's a maturity level, and every agency is at a different maturity level. When you talk about your fiduciary to the taxpayer, or in my case, the fee payer, right? I don't take one single dime of taxes, all right? It's all fees. So my applicants are my customers, and it's the IP community, and it's not internet protocol. It's intellectual property. And so a lot of people don't know that. And yet there's a huge industry out there. The world is still trying to wrap their heads around what intellectual property is. Because in other nations, it is not as sacrosanct as it is here, right? If I have an idea and I put it down and I create the abstract, the claims, and I defend it in court, that's my idea. And people can't take that from me. It's my property. Yet that's not shared throughout cultures throughout the world. And we have to start pushing that out there. My fiduciary is to the fee payer, to those inventors and entrepreneurs who we protect their property through their legal rights. We have to, again, make sure we're pushing that out there. You see, I'm on a mission. And so when I see the president's executive orders, they're also the whole thing about the strategy. How does the world view us? Because zero trust in customer service, right? I apologize. I'm a true red-blooded American. I love this place. There's no better place, right? We stand up in front of the world as the example. So when you put out customer service, we can't accept the fact that we're not better at DMV. What's that? It's not Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. It's the Department of Motor Vehicles. In the last 2 years, everybody has experienced the fact that you can do all this online.
Finally.
Right? Don't do it when you have to show up in front of the office and you spend 2 hours there waiting for everything. So we can do this. Don't accept the mediocrity of filling out forms and being faceless government. Be out there in front. The customer service, be out there. Don't create websites throughout your organization that merely replicate the bureaucracy so it's easier for you to do your job. That's not it. Government workers have a solemn duty to look at the whole workflow, the whole process based on the executive order, and say, look, what makes it better for the applicant online to do this? And I don't assume that just because we're the best, we have the only best answers. I'm actually going to the UK coming in the summer, and we're getting together with entrepreneurs and other innovators from around the world and seeing what their customer requests are. What would make it better to serve them throughout the communities in the world in getting a US patent? Because we do lead the world in patents and trademarks. Everybody recognizes us. If you want to get on Amazon and sell something, you better have a trademark from the USPTO because Amazon won't let you on unless you don't. Same thing with Alibaba. What we have to do is we have to get the other countries involved with this. And these executive orders are a good way to say, look, I'm out there making America happen.
There are just a few EOs. And of course, we have the overall PMA that kind of outlines the priorities of the administration. Jerry, Zero Trust is near and dear to your heart. Are there any particular aspects of these EOs that you're kind of harnessing immediately?
So going back to the strengthening the nation's cybersecurity, I believe that there's very certain reason why they chose the word strengthen, because we have some work to do. I am, and trying sometimes can be controversial in saying so, but we're very compliance focused. FSMA, if we look at FSMA, it's very compliance focused. And the example I always use is, all right, NIST 800-53 says system must have authentication. All right, I did a username and password. That's compliant, but that's not effective. If anybody thinks that's effective, then we have a problem. But so, I latch on to those things. Words mean something, and there's a certain reason why they choose certain words in these executive orders. People have gone over these with fine-tooth combs in regards to the words that they use. So in regards to that one, it says strengthen. So like Jamie's talking about, yes, now I have to devise my strategy on how to apply that. Now we do have OMB memos, which I mentioned before, that are very specific about things, but still, there's still a way of, I don't have the same technology he does. I'm in different maturity levels than he is. I have to devise my own strategy, and that strategy then turns into the tactics that I need to do. Now, how I address the OMB memo, that's a tactic in which I have to do that, but I still have to have that overall strategy. And that's very important. And I think sometimes people overlook that and they jump. And sometimes it's not about just the technology that you use. Technology, you still got to tell it what to do. Technology isn't automagical. You don't plug it in. It's like it knows what to do automatically. You have to have good people, policy, and processes in order to effectively enable the business and the mission, and then use the technology to better enable that and help aid in making that more efficient to the user community, the public, because we do provide public services as well. So it's very important. So yeah, I'm very much in line with it. It is something that you use to devise your overall strategy.
Let me riff on that because compliance versus strengthening. I love it. Government is easy. It takes a checklist and said, well, comply, comply, comply. Doesn't mean it's good. So leadership has a responsibility. And my fellow senior executives throughout the government need to get their stuff together and state that, look, there are many compliance and regulations out there that they're counterintuitive and they go against one another. If you followed all the requirements and regulations, you would never get anything done. That's the problem with an over-regulated economy. And so you see that as soon as regulation is lifted, all of a sudden innovation and creativity take over. So what we have to do, just like any good entrepreneur who's getting private equity or venture capital, we have to use our funds, the scarce funds we have, to prove that we can do whatever it is we're doing, this new and novel thing, and yet we comply minimally. And that's really weird because all the lawyers are like, oh, better not do that. You're going to go in jail. And I don't look good in stripes. I really don't. So I'm going to prevent myself from going to jail, but I'm going to do it in the minimally compliant way I can. Because if I was to choose everything, I would never get anything done. So on this leadership journey, who cares about the lawyers? Yeah, make sure your lawyer is there. Your GC will protect you and don't put you in jail. Got it. But at the same time, get things done and do it in a very inspirational way. And by the way, you're not there on your own. You do have to be a function and a leader where pushes, and you have to have the catalyst to move forward, but you need to bring your colleagues along with you. That's why it's so hard in collaboration. And if you're transparent about your intent, most of the time people say, okay, he's not a jerk, he's okay, or she's doing good. I think I'll let this go a little further. So that's what we really need to lead over compliance, because if you keep doing that, we'll keep having the same results. Remember, insanity, keep doing the same thing, expecting different results.
Yeah. And, he brought up collaboration, and I think that's very important because, usually when I hear some of these discussions and things about what are we doing at our agency, and it's that kind of, we talk about in that kind of castle and moat, what we're doing at our agency. We're interchanging data all the time. We're doing it with the private sector. We're doing it between government agencies. And the way I classify data may not be the same way he classifies data, so at some point we have to start standardizing. I'm doing good at zero trust. He may not, be doing the same things, and I'm sharing that data with him. How am I going to ensure that he's a good steward of the data if I'm the authoritative source? So collaboration is very important from all realms, from collaborating with the private sector to collaborating between agencies. And I think that's why like organizations like ATARC and some of the other ones is very important, because it brings these people together to collaborate on some of these answers and some of these challenges. And, go back to the effectiveness versus compliance. I would rather be effective because compliance will fall in place eventually. So I'm more focused on effectiveness. If the auditor comes by, and yeah, I'm an IG in the IG, but I'm not the auditor. But, if the auditor comes by and says, this, that you're not doing, they read in black and white, this is how you do this. Well, but I'm being effective. Look at my pen test results, things like that. So, I think that's very important points, when we look at these things.
Have the technical courage to say what Jerry just said. In other words, hey, I didn't do anything overtly to go against the regulation, but I got to do my job, right? If he shows, he, she, whatever the auditor is, shows that you did something that's definitely illegal, okay, that's on you. That just means you have to have a good GC. And yes, you do have to say, hey, am I good? And if he says, move. If he says, no, don't do it. So remember, push, push, push. You've got to push the limits in order to get effective.
I want to throw out a question in regard to some of the other EOs that might not be so obviously tech focused. We have diversity and inclusion, for example. Equity is a big word. Jamie, how are you thinking about some of those things as it applies to not necessarily just the tech, but the IP mission as well?
Great question, because I have a new boss. Kathy Vidal comes from the Silicon Valley area. She's been on both sides of the aisle in intellectual property, doing both prosecution and defense. So she knows intellectual property in and out. One of the smartest ladies I've met. Great. She has been given the role in executive order for diversity. Her first 2 weeks on board, and that's all she's been on board. It's been great though, right? Diversity, diversity, diversity. How are we getting it? So she's been out on a messaging campaign trying to influence others in STEM and STEAM to come and apply. Stop the old bias, right? That's a leadership by example. That's getting out there and trying to do it. So on the diversity, inclusion, equity, and all this other great stuff, right? I believe I have 4 kids, 2 daughters, 2 sons, right? And I don't think there's enough females in engineering. Now, it could be a like, it could be a distrust, it could be systemic. I don't know. All I know is I want more females in, because at West Point, when I graduated, we graduated with females. It was a difference from the past. And I tell you what, those females brought in so much professionalism. And I say that too, because I've experienced just the male gym where everybody's like, testosterone to the high heavens, right? And when you have a female who's able to check that and say, what's the reality here? I love that. A strong woman is a fantastic thing to have in any boardroom. It really is great. So,
all right, we'll quote you.
yeah, I'm serious, because they bring a level of professionalism and competence that heretofore hasn't been. So I truly believe from the ground up, I'm getting goosebumps almost, because we need to have more females in STEAM.
Jerry, how about you?
Sorry.
Yeah. No, we take, equity and diversity very seriously. We actually have in our organization, just within the IG, we have a person dedicated for that, for our organization. And so we take it very seriously. Everything he said, yes. But definitely. But, the other thing is about having, people with diverse backgrounds and everything, they have different experiences. And we learn from our experiences, and those different experiences, when you bring those to the table and you start collaborating on things and things like that, those come invaluable. One of the things I want to hear, especially within my organization is, and in one of the cultural things that I want is everybody has a voice. I want to hear from everybody. There's people that have good ideas. And sometimes when that gets filtered, through a chain of command, sometimes, the person that's telling me is going to be filtered in a way. I want to hear from everybody in one form or fashion, because they all have different backgrounds. They all have different perspectives. And I think that's the same thing for diversity and inclusion, is make sure that you're being inclusive of everybody. Everybody has some kind of voice, because, you'll never know when you turn over a rock. There's a great thing that you're going to find. The greatest thing since sliced bread might be under that. So definitely, make sure that everybody has a voice. Everybody has a seat at the table in some form or fashion. I have the fortunate thing is I'm a small enough part of the organization where I just went through the first January and February. I interviewed each employee. What do you like? What do you not like? Just to get to know them, even what makes them tick, what are their challenges, if they want to talk about work, they want to talk about their dogs, I was fine with that. But, just to get to know, my folks, because they're part of the organization. If they aren't there, I'm not getting the job done. I mean, they're helping, they all contribute to the mission. And I want to make sure that They understand that because they're all important, it's, yeah, there is a chain of command and, at times we have to follow that. I'm from the Army as well. Remember, we're in a Navy town.
I'm an Army brat, so this is great.
So definitely, make sure everybody has a voice, make sure everybody's inclusive. Make sure that a lot of the focus we're having is just around communications. Strategically, we're looking at all forms of communications. We've actually done an inventory on all the ways we communicate, inside out, upside down, external, internal, just within teams, within, under the CIO. How do we talk to our customers? How do we present ourselves? How do we want to look? So, making sure that everybody understands, who we are, what we're doing, and internally, understanding the strategy, what we're doing as a whole, and how those individuals, it's like, the story that's always told about the janitor at NASA. He's putting rocket ships in space. He knows how he's contributing to the mission because somebody has to do that job. So it's very important. So yeah, everybody has a voice. And as I said, we have somebody dedicated in the IG just for diversity and inclusion.
Fantastic. Now, I want to pivot away from that a little bit, but also go back to the identity portion of this and how it plays into zero trust. Jamie, you mentioned something, how you want to be anonymous in the IP process. You don't want to know anything about your applicants. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. One of the things that's going around in Congress right now is somehow, some way to get information on who's applying, who's been awarded, who's been rejected in patents and trademarks. And I understand the need and the desire to analyze it and figure out, because with data, you can make good decisions. However, the road to hell is paved with good intention. And there's no way I will stand up and I will leave if anybody puts in front of the application process, you have to put in your name, but that name is kept aside from your application. Why? The examiner doesn't need to know your name because your name in and of itself has certain bias. And so why would you, in a scientific method that's been proven over 250 years, why would you ever want to inject something that might put in bias? So we have a purely scientific method for doing it. And yes, again, it's good intentions, I understand. Maybe after award, if you voluntarily ask the applicant, hey, you were awarded it, you want to fill out this and tell us who you are and what your composition is, that'll be good, that's fine. But we have to really protect those things that need to be protected so bias is not introduced into the process. And I'm doing a lot of things with artificial intelligence. Everybody's worried about the programmers of artificial intelligence because they seem to come from 1, 2, or 3 cultures in the whole. And you can say that as, you have American, you have Asian, and you have Indian. And for the most part, that's a terrible, oh, you're racist. No, that's just a objective reality of who most of the programmers are. So in that diversity, do we have bias in the algorithms? Well, that's part of the process in doing algorithms to ensure that there is no bias in that. So how do you prove that? You have to really work hard at not having self-fulfilling conclusions. And if you have that as your goal in a scientific experiment, just like blind taste test and so on and so forth, that's the best way to do your artificial intelligence. And again, keep the bias out of the scientific method.
Fantastic. How does bias come up in the OIG's role?
Good question. Next. No. No, when you talk about identity, it's definitely, something that is, it's easy to talk about, but it's not so easy in practice sometimes. Definitely. But, understanding, like I'm one human being, but how many digital identities represent me that are out there? Every time, I have an app on my phone, there's another digital identity I created because, I want to keep up with my TikTok trends, and things like that. So, now the Chinese know everything that I like on TikTok. So definitely, but identity is a very important pillar of things, and, proofing who you are, but there's certain levels of insurances of that, right? So I'm a cleared government employee. I have a PIV or a CAT card. I have a certain level of proof and can say with some kind of percentage, high percentage, that probably is Jerry that's logging in right now and authenticating. But if I'm coming in with the username and password, it's a little more risk to that. So definitely, understanding those level of risk with those different ways of proofing yourself, I think is very important. Of course, when we talk about zero trust, there's a lot of other factors that I would add to that. Treating devices like identities too, like a BYOD, there's a certain level of risk to that from a fully managed where I have a lot of telemetry, but there's a lot of factors, and I think there's that algorithm and things that have to come up. But definitely understanding, there's a higher level of risk from an Active Directory administrator with domain privileges, for instance, than, the normal user, accessing the cafeteria schedule, different levels of risk, but it's what the target is that data and what they're able to access or what they have access to or what they're enabled to. So it's very important to understand what your risk methodology is in that and how that fits into a larger equation when you take in the other factors, which decide, all right, what do I allow, what do I not allow in creating that kind of methodology. It's all going to be different. It's going to be different for one agency from another. We all do have our little special snowflake kind of requirements in a way, but it's definitely understanding that policy. Like I said before, you gotta let the technology know what it's got to do. We haven't really talked about technology out here because we're focused more on strategy, people, processes, and things like that. The technology would do its job, but we need to know what to tell it to do, which is very important. So that those processes, those methodologies, those risk tolerances, all those things need to be built, and then we can tell the technologies what to do.
Exactly.
So let's get techie in a minute, all right? I'll
Okay.
give you some food for thought. Think about this. I just talked about bias in the algorithms. I've just talked about, diversity, inclusion, et cetera. What bias do we have about machine identity? If it's a machine, it's okay. It did this. Well, how do we know? Where is that machine coming from? And have we authenticated the machine? Well, wait a minute. The machines don't do work. People have to tell it to do work. How about all the automated routines that we have, that we just have a bias to say, just run? So it was run by the system admin, but does the system admin really know what was run? How do you verify and validate that? How do you authenticate that it's the same machine that should be running it? The SolarWinds debacle could have been solved if they asked the question before executing the update, is this verifiable and valid? The system admin put it in, it downloaded it, it's authenticated, everything's great. It was hacked between the time it was downloaded and the time it was executed. Why didn't anybody check? Because the bias was there. Oh, it's good to go, run. Think about that bias and the technology you have to do to ensure the machines are who they say they are. And that's a whole different paradigm.
I think that's perfect to throw to the audience now to get kind of what your thoughts are. And if you have any questions before I continue. We do have a mic, so please wait for it.
Hello, you've all talked about interoperability between agencies. Are there any standards that you're using for establishing the information? For example, in the commercial industry, we have a lot of our customers using XML for their documentation and metadata standards. Are there standards you all are adopting for that cross-agency interoperability?
It's a work in progress because, we kind of, done things in our stovepipes in a way. We've done what works best for our mission, but now as we've gotten data's growing, now we're doing more, the technology's allowing us to do interoperability. Now it's like, all right, now we got to set on a standard. We got to set on some data governance as well, and I got to make sure that if I'm taking data from you, I'm going to be a good steward of it as well. How am I going to protect it? We've been talking to things like, and I'm gonna, I won't even try to explain it, but things like data virtualization. So I still remain authoritative, but you still get the advantages of the data. So there's some good things that are coming along that are maturing, but I think it's a work in progress. Now that we are getting to a place where we're getting more interoperable with data and doing a lot more data sharing, because we're creating more data than we ever have in the world before and making decisions off that. So as far as the standards, it definitely to me is a work in progress.
Yeah, I don't want to confuse or make things too complex, right? Because in 1985, when I graduated from West Point, right, I was a computer scientist. And I was told the last language I would ever have to learn is Ada, because that's what everybody's going to be standardized on. The folly of government standards, right? So the fact of the matter is NIST serves a great purpose, but the purpose is not to set a standard. The purpose is to show what industry and what the competitive environment set as their standards. It took Cisco forever to realize and give it up. And why do I say that? Cisco, you just look at it, right? I love Cisco products, but they're 85% in the government. They are entrenched. That's a problem, right? We need to open up things. They're not too long ago, Microsoft had a hold on the office within the government. Google came back and said, wait a second, that's a monopoly. You can't do that. So standards are good because you have to agree how you're going to interoperate, but you better be able to be flexible and then go with other standards. So every 3 years, you're going to replace whatever you just built. That is a principle of build. You really need to do that in the software world. Now, your physical structures, they can maintain 5 to 10 years, but if you're not replacing a physical structure in 10 years, there's something probably wrong as well. Americans are all about the newest, the best, moving forward in progress. The government needs to match their agility. And it's not just doing agility, it's being agile, right? Anybody can take a list. It says, in order to be agile, I got to do this, this. No. It's figuring out the opportunity at the time and taking advantage of it on the spot. So I love standards and I hate standards.
So I learned Ada, but I was told it was going to be COBOL. So I learned COBOL, unfortunately. But if anybody's got used a COBOL program, don't call me. But so that's use an example. That's one of the things that's challenging with zero trust, because we're using data to protect data, and we're talking about an architecture. We're not talking about a tool, and we have to make all these integrations work. And which is kind of the next phase that we're going into with our working group is what tools work with what, because I mean, just doing, in my past job, we do network discovery, for example, right? So we would take a tool and do network discovery. Next thing since sliced bread, this tool does discovery, tell you everything on your network. Well, all right, it says, yes, you have a Cisco series, blah, blah, blah router. I use another discovery tool. You have a network device. You use another discovery tool, it says something else. And then you try to bring this data together, and it's like, they can't even decide together what the darn thing is, and you got to try to. So we had to take multiple tools and cross-reference them and fingerprint and things like that. So even in the private sector, we're looking, and that's kind of the thing that we need to challenge, the vendor community as well, is interoperability as well. It's like, I mean, I love some of the tools that are out there, and I'm impressed with some of them, but they got to work at the end of the day together, especially in zero trust. I can't just do a silo here and a silo there. All the pillars have to work together, all the interoperability. I got to bring in all that telemetry, use AI and ML to make sense of it, to make real-time decisions. But it's like, if this tool's saying this and this tool's saying this, and those can't correlate, I have problems. And that's definitely a challenge. Is we always had to do it a paper. We had to always have humans spend many resource hours doing a paper exercise. Is like, what is our actual inventory? And remediate that. And it's like, yeah, there's all these discovery tools, but they can't even settle. I mean, you mentioned Microsoft, and not just pick on them because other companies do it. But we would do software discovery. It would say Microsoft, and if you look in the software, Microsoft Incorporated, Microsoft Corp. They couldn't even standardize on their own name in a way. And I've seen it with Adobe's and things like that. So, it's not just us creating standards of we got to all use XML or not. But, what are the standards to make sure that when we're collecting this data and putting it together, that as the vendor partners that we're going to need to be successful in this, there's some kind of way we can standardize as well so that we can take advantage of all these tools interoperability.
English was your forte.
No, math. Hey, COBOL.
All right, any other questions back there?
Hi, my name is Amir, and no prizes for guessing where I'm from. Question for both of the gentlemen, Jamie and Jerry. Switching tracks a little bit about customer experience. There's a big focus on that. So I'm just curious as to what is your respective visions or your respective audiences, into the foreseeable future?
It's easy for me. So again, as I said before, it's an intellectual property community. And it's those innovators, entrepreneurs, those people in corporate R&D who are submitting applications into the USPTO for patents and or trademarks to, do their business, and getting rid of the siloed mentality of websites that just make it easy to traverse for the organization, right? Think about it. If you have a HR, you're going to make a website for the HR. Finance, you make a website. Yeah. But what does that have to do with the applicant? You really have to look at it from cradle to grave, the whole life cycle of an application. And instead of having to go to different websites and call different people, let me get you that department, you get the runaround, right? You have to optimize that cradle to grave experience for the applicant.
Yeah, so one of the things I talk about, the analogy of a playbook, right? There's the people on the field. Like if I use Zero Trust as the example, is the people on the field, people who are doing the implementation, fighting the battle, getting it done. Then you have the people on the sideline, your project managers, your program managers, the water boys, the trainers, making sure that the plays are being run correctly, that everything's being tracked and making progress. Then you have your C-suite, right? The people that are prioritizing, making sure the resources are there for the team, getting the right players on the team and everything. But why does the team exist? Why does all that exist? Because of the fans. And who are the fans? Those are your end users. That's why you do it, right? If there were no fans, there'd be no team. So my philosophy is they're part of the team. Make them part of the team. Have them come down on the field once in a while, get the experience. Because we want to know how they, like I was saying before, if you weren't here, I want to know how they want to work, not how do they work necessarily. How do they want to work? If they want to be mobile, what's that look like for them? So I can build in those requirements. So something like Zero Trust, they're non-techie people. They just want their stuff to work, right at the end of the day. So, we talked to them about Zero Trust. We had a full briefing with them on Zero Trust. We told them what it was, but we also said, this isn't just another security thing that's going to be a burden on you and, that you're going to have to, give us a piece of your hair so we can test your DNA so you can get on the system kind of thing. No, this is going to bring benefits to you. I'm going to send you, rather than VPNing back to a data center, just to boomerang you back out to the cloud where we're going anyways, send you more direct, but I'm going to get the security, but I'm going to hopefully improve performance. Single sign-on, data interoperability, not having to know what system you have to be on, have it kind of be more seamless, moving about, some of the benefits that I'll be able to do. But here's what I need from you. Here's why I need you part of the team. How do you want to work? Where's that data? When do you need that data? How do you want to access that data? So I can build those personas and understand my user community. Because why? It's going to be much easier for them to adopt these changes going through if I'm including their requirements than it would be me doing it in my little Frankenstein's laboratory saying, here's the next best IT thing. And they're like, we don't like that. Well, my project just went to heck, and I'm back to the drawing board. But if I'm including them and drafting them in as part of the team and getting the team experience and getting their requirements, understanding what their needs are, how they want to work, because I look at this as, a molding of modernization and security, then it's much easier for them to adopt it, understand why we did it, and understand, hey, I'm getting some benefits from this as well.
Fantastic. One more over there.
Thank you. I've got a question for Jamie Holcomb, following on from some of the comments on customer experience. So USPTO, I know, has been designated as a high impact service provider, and OMB talk about customer experience, the ability of understanding that customer journey across all of the different touch points. And I think that's something that a lot of agencies are struggling with, right? Because digital often is siloed from the call center. I think even in USPTO, trademarks are somewhat siloed from patents. So how are you thinking about tackling this, like going forward, to really understand all of those different customers that USPTO has, and from a diversity perspective as well, their experience across all of those different touch points?
Well, I am happy to report that just yesterday, and I swear it is true, just yesterday, the high impact service area. I think that's both patents and trademarks have been classified as that. And what we were doing yesterday was going over the actual initial requirements for that customer experience. We've done impact analysis. We've had all this great stuff. Now it's time to do. Now, how do you time? What do you mean do? As Jerry was just saying, you have to include the folks along the journey. So often the waterfall approach has been, tell me what the requirements are, I'll build it and see if you like it. No, 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 no. After each iteration, after each sprint, we're going to ask the customer, is this what you meant? Is this how it's going? And then instead of all the way at the end, we'll get iterative feedback on how we're doing along the way. It takes longer though. And so what you have to do is put out in that agile DevSecOps mentality, the minimally viable product for whatever that sprint is. And remember, you could have gold-plated everything. Don't do it, right? Oh, but if we can just do this. No, do what's required so you can get out in front of them and see what's really important. Because what you think is important is not what's important. Put that in your head. What you think is important is not important. It's whatever the customer is saying is important. Oh, but we can't do that. We don't have enough money. Yeah, you do, because you haven't thought about how to do the process all over again. What you're doing is you're looking at it in the small. And so often systems processes need to be elevated and look up across the board. Too often the tasks are given to the low-lying individual with no understanding of the system, with no understanding of the reach. And so you have an obligation to ensure that reach is looked on across the board and everyone is included in it, not just a couple people at the time.
Well, that is the end. So I'm going to pass it back to Tom, but thank you so much, Jamie and Jerry. This was great.
And Jamie, by the way, I have not seen the specific memo rescinding the ADA mandate. So it's still out there, by the way.
I'm available.
All right. No. And maybe you can do Jupyter to Java one of these days. That would help modernize some of those weapon systems. All right. Before we wrap up, I want to bring back Tom Suter, who's got a great award. Gentlemen, Jerry, don't go too far.
Jerry, don't go too far. I just wanted to thank a few people, and then we're going to do this award, and then Tom's going to wrap up the program. But I definitely want to thank our Carosoft friends. They're a great partner working with us AV. It's our first hybrid in-person event. Tyler Hagan, Corey Baumgartner, and Dahlia Hamandi. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to be checking in with your office in a little bit and put some good words in for you. Thank you so much. I do want to thank my staff. Great job, folks. It's a team effort. Alyssa has headed our events department, but everybody was involved from our social media to group and our working group meeting. And Kirsten's kind of taken my job moderating panels. I'm just the microphone person now. It's great to develop some talent. And we've gone from 4 before pandemic to 15. So, we really appreciate everybody. But I really want to thank our next awardee. He couldn't make it yesterday, but for Government Contributor of the Year, it's really important when you have an effort like this, you've got to pick the right champion. And or the effort doesn't really go far. It doesn't matter how organized we are. You've got to have a really a fantastic leader. And Jerry has a great background. He worked at State. I got to see his operations there. He had that running really tight. Very, very impressed with him there. I remember we met at USDA. You did a panel for us. It was around cloud computing. And I'm like, he could handle this TIC 3.0 thing. And then you had a good feel for it. A lot of your folks went to CISA. So, we started there. But then the zero trust, people come up to me, they go, zero trust, that's just a marketing buzzword. And it's working pretty well. This zero to have a galvanizing effort. So Jerry led with some other government folks the idea of having this lab. And we work in a physical environment, Equinix, as well as a virtual environment, working with a company called Acuity Systems, did some work at GSA. But we thought, I don't know how many people we thought was actually going to be in the lab. But the latest is, we did it for over 2 weeks. We kind of made some exceptions. You know, why are we going to limit this if we have a good contributor? We're up to 60 companies are in this thing under Jerry's leadership. And we're seeing a lot of good results. And we, you know, we're not done yet. As Jerry was alluding to, he's got some big plans for this lab. So without further ado, Jerry Karen, HHSOIG. Oh. Go over here. Yep. You would?
Yeah. Well, thank you. This comes as a great surprise. Very honored. But you know, it's a team. Definitely, Tom, thank you for the opportunity. It's allowed me to do networking, learn, which I'm always trying to do, always looking for the art of the possible, for lack of a better term. But it's been a great experience, and you know, your organization has been great in allowing me to do those things and the freedoms. It's been great working with all the vendor community, all the other government folks, the ATARC team. Definitely, Tom mentioned them in this event, but they are always spectacular in supporting and however we need. So I really appreciate everything that they do. They always answer when I need something or I have a question or something. And so this is a great honor, and I'm humbled by it. So thank you very much.
In one final thank you, our MC, Tom Temin, guiding us through this, the cruise director for the last couple of days.
Thanks very much, brother. Okay. You can applaud for me too. It's all right. Okay, a final thank you to the sponsors, ASRC Federal, Acquia, Blackwood, Okta, Zscaler, CrowdStrike, sorry, I need a pen to follow this. Contrast Security? I don't think that's a typo. Devo, Dynatrace, ExtraHop, Fortinet, Federal, Gigamon, GitLab, NASA Soup, NIH, NITAC, Pluralsight, Red Hat, RegScale, Rocket Chat, Rubric, Federal Science Logic. Boy, this is really getting smaller. Software AG, Sonotype, Tenable, VM, Trend Micro, Versec, and Micro Focus for the sponsorship and all the help you've given for this panel. A quick reminder, ATARC is having a breakfast summit at the Washington, D.C. City Club. There's a QR code on the screen. It really is there. So you can sign up with your phone and do that. It has been really a pleasure seeing all of you in person, chatting, talking, learning together from industry and government. And that concludes our formal presentations, concludes the summit. We'll see you next year. Hussers, here we come.